don't breathe like he used to breathe. My grandfather held the soil like scripture in his hands. But now the fields are wired tight, a fortune of nearly 500 billion running under satellite light. Just 2% decide the table for 330 million souls, while the hum of iron engines sends our birthright to the cold. They're pulling 5 gigabytes an hour, rising like a predator now, send upward to a corporate sky. The farmers locked outside. And though nearly 20 million work the gears, only a tiny handful touch the land. The machine grows tall, the people small, their stories slipping from their hands. Oh, the root remembers freedom, even buried in the dark. You can chain the lie with numbers, but you cannot chain the spark. This ain't farming, it's a wheel of steel and coal. Your grandfather's farm's a checkpoint on a technocratic road. They take the seed, they take the soil, they take the hours from your spine, and the machine keeps pulling everything 1 acre at a time. A quarter of the world's sea, locked behind the corporate gate. You can't save your own just by again. Let algorithms choose your fate. And nearly 10 billion animals push through corridors of chrome. Where the land once sang, the servers drone. What it used to feed now grown. There's over 3 trillion in equipment. Farmers rent but never keep. And well over 300 billion in debt, pulling families in deep. Call it progress, call it glory, but I've read the hidden lines. The machine is fed by labor, and it starves the working mind. The land still knows your footsteps, even under grids and wires. The machine can dim the daylight, but it cannot drown the fire. This ain't farming, it's a wheel of steel and coal. A tiny few hold the compass for the many down below. They count your days, they count your years, they tally blood and time, and the machine keeps taking families down, 1 story at a time. Your grandfather's land's been patterned, your pasture quantified, but no algorithm knows the truth of what your hands decide. This ain't farming, it's a kingdom built on screens. They turn the soil to a number, turn the farmers into means. But the land remembers kindness, and the people still alive. We outlive every empire, 1 heartbeat at a time. raised the throne of glass and wire, a kingdom born of cold desire, and crowned the silent code that came to rule ya. It watched the trembling of your breath, it priced your life, it mapped your death, a final betrayal dressed as something true. Bless the unbroken will, bless the unbroken will. They promised order, promised peace, but every gift required a piece of who you were before their grid consumed you. A nation bartered for control, a ledger carved into your soul, a quiet doom disguised as forward future. Bless the unbroken will, bless the unbroken will. Oh, the watchers rise in the circuitry. Oh, the warnings lost in the dawn. Oh, the people bow to the ministry till every name was gone. I walked the halls where truth was sold, where human hands grew numb and cold, and efficiency became the faith they gave you. You'd never see the chains they built, but every sunrise dripped with guilt, a quiet empire shaping your behavior. Bless the unbroken will, bless the unbroken will. They tokenize the land and sky, they tokenize the land and sky. The right to live, the right to die, the right to live, the right to die. A sovereign life reduced to captured measure. The future shrank to narrow lines, a cage of data, coded signs, a subtle death they dressed in borrowed pleasure. Bless the unbroken will. Rise though the night is closing in. Rise though the stars are dimmed and still. Rise though the crown is forged of sin. Bless the unbroken will. So keep your lantern in the storm. Guard every soul that still feels warm, and hold the truth no tyrant's code can alter. For even at the world's last hour, a single heart can break the tower, a whispered vow the darkness cannot falter. Bless the unbroken will, bless the unbroken will. The bankers wrote their letters in shadows cold and deep, a promise forged of iron chains to bind us in our sleep. They called it just a progress, a digital decree, but freedom has no barcode and souls are not for leave. It's the final countdown, the reckoning of men. Crypto gold and silver rise where paper dies again. They dream of central power, of money's iron cage, but voices rise unbroken to light this modern age. From DC halls to Davos, the tyrants stake their claim. They preach of safety, justice, but hunger for the chain. They hide behind the slogans. They whisper, trust the plan. But every law they're passing just enslaves the common man. It's the final countdown, the reckoning of men. Crypto gold and silver rise where paper dies again. They dream of central power, of money's iron cage, but voices rise unbroken to light this modern age. The merchants and the dreamers, the rebels and the wise, take refuge in the ledgers where the watchful state can pry. In Xano's cloak of shadows, in Monero's quiet streams, they guard the ancient promise of liberty's old dream. It's the final countdown, the reckoning of men. Crypto gold and silver rise where paper dies again. They dream of central power, of money's iron cage, but voices rise unbroken to light this modern age. So raise your hands in firelight, let tyrants hear the sound. The people's last defiance is the truth that won't back down. It's more than just survival, it's more than just a stand. It's freedom's final chorus sung across this burning land.
Welcome back to the Aaron Day Show. This is Season 2, Episode 46. This will be a very interesting episode, although I am traveling, so I'm in a hotel, and I'm actually having to use my hotspot again because the internet here is not sufficient enough even to do a live stream. So hopefully the audio and video will work out. It actually, I didn't have as much of an opportunity to get everything prepared for tonight. And in fact, some of the things that I wanted to have to show live are in a earlier state than I would like, but I will nevertheless show you what I have related to this incredibly important topic of the Epstein Bitcoin coup. And if you have been watching this show, excuse me, I have covered this topic from literally day one. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over to the aarondayshow.com website, which I recommend you actually watch the show there and comment there, as I suspect censorship will continue to expand on the topics that I'm talking about, namely technocracy, as most of the platforms we distribute through are run by technocrats. So So anyway, I've taken a lot of effort to build these sites, and then I'm doing everything that I can to make sure that they're censorship resistant and completely decentralized. But tonight's topic is important for a couple of reasons. If you have been paying any attention, which I'm sure you have, the price of Bitcoin has been absolutely cratering. And I don't know for sure what all of the causes are for it, but I suspect that some of what we're talking about tonight might be part of it. And if not, it certainly should be. I'm going to share now, the Aaron Day Show site, just to kind of walk through some of the episodes, because I'm not going to rehash this. As I was putting this together, I'm like, well, do I really want to do a recap of everything on this? And then I realized I don't want to talk for 10 hours on this. But if you go back to the very first podcast that I did with Kurt Wuckert Jr., season 1, episode 1, this was actually discussed, the hijacking of Bitcoin. Now, Kurt's part of the BSV community, and so he had a different take on it. But so many of the podcasts that I've done have touched on this topic. Season 1, episode 3. So here was the very first one: the crypto revolution, Bitcoin, civil war, and the fight against CBDC. So this was literally my first ever podcast, and then from there, we continued to talk about these types of issues, including the Craig Wright case, the BSV, BCH thing, all of that. And then episode 3 was with Roger Ver, just 3 weeks before he was arrested in Spain, to discuss his critically important book, Hijacking Bitcoin. And so since then, everything that I've been doing prior to even having a podcast for the last 3 years has been to warn people about CBDCs, because CBDCs are part of this technocratic threat. So the technocratic threat is that we are, and by the way, it's happening at lightning speed. I hope you've been catching some of these technocracy roundtables. I mean, you have Elon Musk talking about, we're not going to have currency as we know it. We'll have a system based on energy credits. He's talking about universal, not basic income, but super income. This is all out of a technocratic, literally, playbook that was developed in the 1930s. So I was warning people about this 3 years ago, and CBDCs fit into that. So once I realized what was going on with CBDCs and that CBDCs were part of a larger framework, I dropped everything that I was doing to do two things: to warn people about technocracy and then the part that CBDCs play within that, and then 2, to promote alternatives. And the alternatives that I started to promote, if you have the early copy of my book, this is before I was fully immersed in privacy coins. Privacy coins were mentioned, but I was still involved in this whole Bitcoin, which version of Bitcoin is going to be the one that wins out. But even in my book, I discussed the ties and the hijacking of Bitcoin. And my book came out before Hijacking Bitcoin, but I discussed what was going on with the hijacking of Bitcoin from a different perspective than Roger talks about, which was, I talked a lot about what happened at MIT. Namely, that in doing my research, I found that the Federal Reserve has been working on 3 CBDC pilots going all the way back to like 2017. So most people, I mean, even as recently as this year, if you saw this testimony and people talking on the floor about trying to pass some anti-CBDC bill, some of the arguments they were using were things like, well, we need to at least research a CBDC so that we can stay competitive with our peers. I'm like, research a CBDC? We started developing one 8 years ago using Bitcoin core developers. So I have been talking about this from the very beginning. And now it came out this week in some of these House leaked emails from Jeffrey Epstein that, in fact, because I put this article together in the Brownstone Institute. This was my second article. Let me pop this up. Excuse me. This is my second article at the Brownstone Institute, and it was entitled "The Sinister Links Between Jeffrey Epstein, CBDCs, and Bitcoin." And in this article, I lay out a lot of what I learned about what was going on with MIT and these CBDCs, because of course I was warning people about CBDCs, but what I found in researching this is, okay, we know that at some point in time, MIT took over and started funding the Bitcoin core developers. We also knew that Jeffrey Epstein funded this broader MIT Multimedia Lab. Now, the MIT Multimedia Lab was involved in a variety of different projects, not just digital currencies. And so I speculated, but without stating that I knew definitively in this article, that I suspect that Epstein directly funded these Bitcoin core developers, and then probably by extension later started funding some of these CBDC pilots. And people pushed back, and Bitcoin maxis were like, "Oh, that's a conspiracy theory," blah 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 blah. And it turns out it's definitively true, and the money explicitly went to to these purposes. And so this is now documented in emails. And by the way, these emails and all of this information are now at the technocracyatlas.com website, which now has 35.8 million words. I have put not only all of the House emails, I put all of the DOJ information that was released earlier on Epstein, and the minute whatever we get, redacted or not, from this latest ruling, I'm going to take all of that information and index it and make it searchable using the AI search bot at technocracyatlas.com. And as I will show you later on tonight, I'm adding more functionality so that we can go beyond just a chatbot on Technocracy to begin doing collaborative investigations, crowdsourced investigations. Because I have been sounding the alarm on this the whole time. I've been saying, listen, CBDCs are a threat, but then all of the propaganda and everything that people are pushing out basically came down to, well, Bitcoin is freedom money. Bitcoin is the answer. And I even see it today. I see libertarians saying this. Oh, well, Bitcoin fixes this. Bitcoin fixes nothing with respect to freedom. Bitcoin was hijacked every bit as much as Roger described in the book, and then worse, like 10 times worse. You basically had Bitcoin hobbled from being Bitcoin Cash to digital gold at the same time. The very same people, even some of the same developers. This developer, Corey Fields, was an early Bitcoin core developer. Then, with funding from Jeffrey Epstein through MIT, began working on SegWit, Lightning, some of the technologies that basically handicapped Bitcoin and made it not usable as digital cash. Then he became one of the co-authors of Project Hamilton, and Project Hamilton is a U.S. retail CBDC pilot. And in fact, it was a successful pilot that the last time I checked, I talked to some people that actually worked on it. It was able to do 1.8 million transactions per second. So you have all these Bitcoin maxis saying, well, Bitcoin can only do 7 transactions per second, but it should be digital gold, and it's superior because it's decentralized, and a whole bunch of other just completely fallacious arguments, thinking that the Lightning Network was going to fix it when Lightning Network was never going to fix it. This was kind of a complete psyop to buy time to fully develop CBDCs, which would be used as digital cash. Now, as the story gets even more complicated, yes, we don't have CBDCs, but we have Tether, and some of the very people involved in the hijacking of Bitcoin tied to the Bitcoin Foundation were involved with the founding of Tether, and I suspect also probably involved in connecting Howard Lutnick and others, although I haven't been able to definitively prove that link. So this is massive news. Oh, can you hear me? I'm seeing somebody saying that my hotspot went down. Can anybody hear me? Usually when it stops, I get some kind of indication. Anyway, please, if you can, in the comments, let me see, can you hear me? So in any event, I think the hotspot's working, but so I've been very, very adamant about discussing this, and the maxis, all of whom have blocked me, from Michael Saylor to Max Kaiser to the guy who wrote the Bitcoin Standard, to Adam Back, to Luke Dash Jr., core developers. They've all blocked me. Most of them I've never had any direct interaction with. And I mean, this is just an extension of what Roger talked about in the book, but this is now critically important. Like, I mean, I can't express this enough, because I even see it's become this thing in libertarian circles, where I'll go to libertarian events and it's this unspoken thing where there are people that have been involved in Bitcoin from very early on that are libertarians that are continuing to spread the misinformation that it's freedom money, and they know better. And when you challenge them on it, they're very uncomfortable around it. And then it becomes one of these things. We should just let's not fight over this. Let's not fight over whether or not the thing that was supposed to be the answer to central bank tyranny has been hijacked by Jeffrey Epstein in traditional finance. We can't talk about that. Is this the kind of what we're in polite company now? Or what we don't want to disturb the power that the libertarians have? Libertarians have no power. If the libertarians had anything, it at least should have been the truth. And this is an ongoing thing. And not that I've been pulling any punches, but I will tell you this. In 2026, I'm going to be even, more vocal about this, more directly vocal about it. I'm going to start calling people out. I'm not going to go to a libertarian event and listen to somebody tell me that Bitcoin is freedom money and just ignore that, because people are getting profoundly damaged by this. So one of the so let's look at what happened. So Roger got arrested 3 weeks after this book came out, perhaps just a coincidence. But then the timetable from there, this was in like April. 3 months later, we had this big Bitcoin conference in Tennessee. And then all these politicians come out, Trump and RFK and Cynthia Loomis, and everybody's there. Now they're talking about a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And now they're talking about, crypto regulation and everything else. So the absence of people having this information, I don't blame most people for believing what they believe about Bitcoin, simply because they've never been presented with alternative information. I mean, I even know, I have a suspicion of how RFK learned about Bitcoin, and it wasn't talking to people that have been on different sides of this discussion. I think a lot of these people went into it, and then they were sold the propaganda, and they still haven't heard the other perspective. But now this is getting really serious, because with what's going on globally and the rate at which technocracy is moving, and we're talking digital IDs, we'll talk about, which if you haven't, I encourage you to sign up. I think we have over 1,000 registered users now with Technocracy Atlas in just a week. It was very helpful that we launched it. I was on Alex Jones the day we happened to launch, just a week or two ago. I don't even know now. Time is kind of blurry. But what I put together here is an analysis to show people visually what's going on with technocracy. And so, if you the end game of technocracy is one global government ruled by scientists and engineers, which now has evolved to kind of AI, with an energy credit-based currency. That's the simplest description. And if you're going to measure how that's going, you're going to look at what's the proliferation of digital IDs, what's the proliferation of digital programmable currency that can be controlled by third parties, and what's going on with AI surveillance. Well, it's a disaster what's going on. I mean, this isn't like something where it's, in 2030, this is going to happen. 60% of people in the US have real ID, which is already digital in a lot of states, and be a majority of the states by the end of this year. And by 2027, the expectation is it will be fully digital everywhere. We have the Genius Act and now the Clarity Act, which is going to be tokenizing not just money, but all of your investment vehicles and everything else, which will be controlled and regulated. So your programmable stocks and ETFs and everything else. And then the massive expansion of Palantir, Operation Stargate, Oracle, OpenAI, all of it. This has happened faster this year than in the previous 4 years. And globally, you have 154 countries working on CBDCs. 3.5 billion people are already under digital ID, or laws have been passed and it's just in the implementation stage. This is serious. This is no longer, if you go back and you read the first edition of my book, I was warning people, this is no longer a warning. This is a description of things that have already happened. And now I'm putting together things to say, all right, here's the level that it's at. It's kind of like, all right, we're at level 3 out of a 5 scale. And level 5 is a complete, single global government, and essentially the loss of free will, because what decisions you can make on a day-to-day basis in your life will be determined by a social credit system tracked by AI surveillance. So this is the severity of what's going on. So when people say, well, don't argue about Bitcoin, or you don't want to argue it with within the Libertarian Party about Bitcoin, this is the issue that libertarians should be talking about. This was the issue at its inception. Bitcoin and the Hijacking Bitcoin discussed this. The first phase of this very much was libertarian. It became more mainstream, but to still be a libertarian and to still tell people that this is freedom money is false. It's an outright lie. And there are people in my own community. I'm in New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project. And, one of our state reps just put in a bill for $100 million municipal bond backed by Bitcoin. Everybody's cheering. It's bullshit. If your whole idea was to separate money and state, and now you're cheering on people using the force of the state to buy your surveillance cryptocurrency that Epstein hijacked, you're not a liberty person. This has to be said. There is so much of this collectivism and, we're all in it together. What, all in it together on going against the very premise of the thing that we were supposed to be working on together? But we're winning because what? Because we got a bill that increased the value of our fiat holdings of a hijacked cryptocurrency. This has to be called out. There shouldn't be unity around something like Bitcoin. And I will tell you, well, I'll get into this, but it's going to get worse, because now the way Elon Musk is describing Bitcoin is essentially it's an energy currency. I actually see a scenario where they will try to use Tether, which is a backdoor CBDC. It's a programmable fiat, and then back it by Bitcoin, which is surveillance digital gold. We're actually going so far away from a currency that you use directly without any government or bank to 2 levels of surveillance. Your money can effectively be frozen at a couple of different stages in the process. It's the biggest rug pull in financial history. And yet still Bitcoin maxis and certain libertarians, I call them faux libertarians now, because they're not libertarians. You're not a libertarian if you're pushing legislation and hiring lobbyists and so forth, and trying to push the government to steal and or use taxpayer theft to buy an asset. It's absurd. So anyway, so tonight I'm going to go through at a high level some of the connections here. But more importantly, as I've talked about this, somebody that, Bruce Fenton, who, I've been a friend of, and he's also a free stater, but he was involved with the Bitcoin Foundation when this whole transition happened. And his response to this was old news, this Epstein thing. It is not old news. I've been to 27 states. My wife and I have been to 27 states and 4 countries. I ran for president to raise awareness on this issue. I've been all over the place. I don't know how many podcasts I've done. I don't know how many millions of people I've reached, and almost no one knows about this. There are some people within the cryptocurrency, but you know what? But my challenge to you will be, and one of the things I'm going to do in this podcast is give a list of 20, questions you might want to ask during the holidays, Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever, with your friends and with your family and your relatives around the table, if the conversation of Bitcoin comes up. And you can ask them whether they've heard about the fact that Epstein was involved in funding these developers. And you can ask them if they know that Bitcoin used to be used with retailers as an actual currency. I've got the whole list of they're simple questions. They're not really complex questions. And I guarantee you unless you're like really hardcore in crypto and you've gotten everybody in for years, I'm going to guess that 90% plus have never heard of any of this still to this day. This is another tactic that Bitcoin maxis try to do. They try to deflect They try to push the issue under the rug. And I'm done with it, because we actually, 2026 has to be the year of action. It's not, we're not going to vote. You're not going to change your congressman. There's no opposition in Congress to this. The Republicans are in on it. Most of them have no idea. Some of the people, this guy Warren Davidson today that put together the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Bill, people can now pay their taxes with Bitcoin, and then that'll go into the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. I mean, the price dropped, that guy's obviously kryptonite, but I've talked to him before. I gave him a copy of my book. These people have no idea in Congress how any of this works. But they've met with lobbying firms funded by people like the Winklevoss twins, who also wouldn't know liberty if it kicked them in the face. And so they're out there thinking, there's momentum on this thing, and these, rich crypto people are saying this. And so they're trying to elevate their status and so forth. And so they think they're doing this great American patriotic thing. And it's just a gigantic psyop. So in any event, there's a lot to go through here. And, I'll do the normal recap of the last couple of events. I will say I'm not going to do the podcast next week because it's on Thursday. Obviously not going to do it on Thanksgiving, and I'm going to take Monday off as well, primarily because, we have 6 sites, 6 initiatives that we've launched, and they're at various phases. Most of them are kind of alpha phase. We're kind of working through the websites and the programs and everything else. But by January of next year, they're all going to be fully production ready to scale up. I mean, we already have thousands of users actually coming in. So I'm spending a lot of my time now trying to automate and manage some of this, because I think next year, particularly with the medical tourism marketplace and some of the other initiatives, I want to make sure we can get those things bulletproof and ready for growth. But next year has to be about action. Next year has to be about people. If you want to stop this technocracy, once you finally understand what the technocracy is, the number one thing you have to do is you have to stop using fiat currency, because that is the heart of the control system. But then you have to also start moving out of other areas like state-controlled healthcare and, big food and so on and so forth. And so, I don't mind talking about these things, but I've realized that I'd rather spend more of my time building these things and onboarding people to these things, while still making people aware of what's going on. But we have to actually build and get people using these things, because we are running out of time. And I'll tell you, the Bitcoin thing has been a huge distraction. Something that was supposed to be the answer to central banks ended up dividing all of crypto into 20,000 different coins. And then they ended up using propaganda censorship, and now are using lobbying and politicians to delude people into thinking that something that can be tracked by the government and that's slow and expensive, that can only do 7 transactions per second, is going to be the answer to CBDCs and digital tyranny, where, the second largest holder of Bitcoin next to Satoshi Nakamoto is the US government, who stole 327,000 Bitcoin through civil asset forfeiture. That doesn't even make sense. When you look, it doesn't make sense even on the surface. But people will do anything to increase their fiat holdings, including lie to themselves, lie to their friends, lie to their family, and lie and betray their entire political ideology. And again, I think at some point, if you're not calling that out, you're part of the problem. So a lot of people are not going to like what I have to say tonight, because it's kind of like what I say about you're either for medical freedom or you're for Maha, but not both. Okay, these things are true though, and we're actually running out of time. So there's this like politeness that goes on where people don't want to, push these boundaries. It's like the boundaries are, if we don't push these things or talk about these things or build alternatives, we're going to be in a complete digital prison. So the last episode we did on Monday was that was a huge episode, right? I had 3 guests. We talked about the involvement of what's going on with big agriculture and the food supply as it relates to technocracy. And I will tell you, the next Technocracy roundtable that we are going to do on December the 17th is going to be on that topic. So we're going to expand on what Craig and I discussed here. And it is a frightening situation, what is going on with our food supply in terms of the consolidation of the industry, genetically modified foods, but it's completely captured. This is not an example of these are companies that just out competed in the marketplace. This is all, people from the USDA. It's 127 former members then working for big. It's like the FDA and big pharma, except worse because it's food. It's something that everybody actually needs, as opposed to big pharma, which is something almost no one needs. And so we're going to be spending some time on that. And then we talked about The Final Betrayal, the phenomenal book that Patrick Wood and Courtney Turner have just released. And I want to say, as we're getting into the holidays, get Hijacking Bitcoin and Final Betrayal and give these things to your friends and family at the holidays. They say don't talk about politics or religion. These are the things that we have to talk about. And so these are probably two of the most thought-provoking books that are relevant to the topics that people are concerned about right now. What's going on with AI? What's going on with surveillance? What's going on with the dollar and digital currencies? And so, so these are great guests, and those are two great books. And then the episode prior to that, I launched the Technocracy Atlas, which we've already, and I'll show you further changes that I've made just today. My vision for this is that it's going to be a cross between, when it's done, an open source version of Palantir plus WikiLeaks, plus the addition of and the integration of privacy coins like Zano and Freedom Dollar to actually be able to pay bounties to anonymous people to do investigative research. That's where I see this going. So what it is right now is it's a decent AI chatbot that is pulling from a great database of information. It has all of Patrick Wood's material and Courtney Turner and Brownstone material, all of my material, Hijacking Bitcoin, and all of the Epstein files and everything else. And I'm adding more and more information every day. I'm actually buying more computers. I'm buying more hard drive space. Just for them, I'm going to buy 200 terabytes of hard drive space, probably moving up to maybe a petabyte of hard drive space, just to continue to make sure that we have the actual raw data and the source data ourselves. These AI models are trained on slop, and then on top of the slop, they have this whatever the AI safety layer is that they have that helps prevent the truth from filtering through. So the big investment that I've been making and why I've been so excited about talking to Mike and collaborating with Mike is that we have the ability to use these tools to promote the truth. OSR is going to launch. I'm actually going to push that. I realized I actually scheduled the launch date for Thanksgiving, which was probably a bad idea. So we're going to actually launch it 2 weeks from today. And actually a week from Monday, I'm going to launch a new version of the ownnothing.org site. That site, as you may recall, is about allowing people to see, put in your contract, these click wrap agreements that you have, and see it visually in a scoring system how many of your rights you've given up. And the next upgrade for this is going to be, I have all of the package inserts, or I have package inserts for 11,000 different pharmaceuticals. And you're going to be able to see the score on those. Now, the unique thing about package inserts is they're not even click wrap agreements. You don't even sign them. You're subject to them, but it's all fine print. And you never countersign the agreement. So you're going to be able to see, what the effects of these drugs are, how they're categorized, so on and so forth. To be able to type in the drug. To me, that was eye-opening because it relates to the whole healthcare space. So I'll have at least the package inserts, but then I'm going to try to also get health insurance and maybe even hospitals and some other areas involved as well. And I'm going to build out Own Nothing, an industry at a time, and probably related to, as we make people aware of what they've already given up contractually, then we'll also present things like OSARA, a medical tourism marketplace, as an alternative, because people do not have to be stuck with the systems that they have. So I've already talked about this. Just a reminder to get, I highly recommend Mike Adams' AI, brightu.ai. You can either download it on your own computer, which I recommend, so that you can have it even if the internet is down. And he's trained this on information you're not going to find anywhere else online. So, so with that, and I've done a bunch of interviews, and I need to even keep up with getting these posted. I just did a great interview with Brie Teresi yesterday. She's started a new podcast, a new show on financial freedom, and so I was her first guest on that. So grateful to have been on that, and then the Alex Jones show with Mike Adams and several others. And I have a lot of other. I've got to balance how many of these podcasts I can even do at this point. But the good news is the word is starting to get out, and I do suspect 2026 is going to be the year that the stuff that I've been saying for 3 years is now finally mainstream. I just hope that it's not too late. So tonight I'm going to walk through. Let me get my notes here. I'm going to go through a quick overview of this Epstein thing, and then I'm going to hop to the 20 tips, 20 topics of discussion at the dinner table over the holidays about Bitcoin. But to kind of frame this, they told you that Bitcoin was freedom money, and they lied. I mean, flat out. The U.S. government now owns 327,000 Bitcoin that were seized largely without convictions through civil asset forfeiture. BlackRock now controls 783,000 Bitcoin. 3 mining pools control 60% of the network. 7 people control the code. Jeffrey Epstein funded the MIT Media Lab with $850,000 while they throttled Bitcoin from digital cash to digital gold. The same MIT that ran all 3 Federal Reserve CBDC pilots. So tonight I'm going to give you 20 questions that will destroy every Bitcoin maximalist at your holiday dinner table. But that's really not the important part. The important part is to help your friends and family understand what's going on. And we have people that are putting their retirement funds into ETFs. They're buying Bitcoin treasury companies. They're investing in things like Michael Saylor's thing, and they don't know why. Most of the time, it's just like, well, they heard it was a good idea. Financial advisor said so on and so forth, but they don't understand it, which is part of why a lot of people have been selling recently. Particularly, the more you learn about it, the less you're going to like it. Excuse me, I've still got my cough, but I am getting better out here, so I've got to mute every now and again. All right, so again, free will is non-negotiable. That's the whole premise of what we're doing with Daylight Freedom Foundation, is that what we're trying to protect here when we're fighting technocracy is free will itself, our ability to control our own thoughts, actions, and emotions. But they negotiated Bitcoin's free will while we weren't looking. So as I mentioned, 327,000 Bitcoin, that is what the government owns now. This was only 215,000 Bitcoin. So there was just this big seizure, I don't know, time's blurring, but it's been within the last 2 or 3 weeks, of another 125,000 Bitcoin. Ross Ulbricht's Bitcoin, that was the biggest chunk of this from Silk Road. Technically, since he's been pardoned, in theory, he's entitled to those. I've heard rumors that those were actually sold. And again, interestingly, our own government can't keep track of something that's on a public ledger. But they didn't capture Bitcoin by accident. This was a very deliberate process with a lot of people involved over quite a long timetable. So this started in 2013. So MIT Multimedia Lab becomes Bitcoin's new headquarters. And an MIT Multimedia Lab steps in at this point. Now, I did a podcast, I don't know, a couple months ago on Brock Pierce. Brock Pierce needs to be researched. And when we talk about the Technocracy Atlas, part of what I want to do with this tool is to crowdsource this research, because a lot of people I know have put together different pieces of it. I have people contacting me all the time. Oh, have you thought about this? Have you looked at this? Hey, the best way for us to piece all of this together is to make it available publicly, put the sources there, rate what we think the accuracy of the information is, which may change over time. But I mean, let's be transparent about it and let's collaborate about it, as opposed to what's happened is a bunch of people putting research out there and then no one hears about it. And then the maxis just dismiss it with, oh, well, that's old news. But Brock Pierce is a big part of this. I mean, before 2013, in 2011, Brock Pierce was on either Epstein's island, was on somewhere on an island with Epstein at a conference. And what the research showed is that he began advising Epstein on cryptocurrency pretty early on. So Epstein's knowledge of Bitcoin goes back to 2011. And what was interesting is even when I was writing my book and everything, you won't find public speeches. It's actually hard to find talks about him at all. On the Technocracy Atlas site, I actually have there's a little 1-minute clip of this image that I created with Epstein on currency. And I tried to clone his voice. It was actually hard to get samples because the only thing that was really available was this deposition footage that he had. But it was one of these things where, well, the way he's answering questions is he's skirting his way around. So they're either non-answers or pleading the fifth or whatever. So to even cobble together a 10-second clip to clone his voice is difficult. So he wasn't out there prolifically. I believe in 2017, he did do a public interview on it. But in any event, we now know he was heavily involved in it going back as far as 2011. So from there, we have a company called Blockstream in 2014, which raises $75 million. Now, what is Blockstream? Blockstream was a company started by Bitcoin Core developers. And the goal of this company was to make money benefiting from the fact that this big hijacking happened to Bitcoin, making it slow and expensive. So Bitcoin went on its original path of being digital cash, something that was cheap and fast to use, that could do a lot of transactions. Blockstream wouldn't have had a business, but Blockstream had a business of trying to solve the problems that Bitcoin inherently solved by creating what are called second layer solutions. And so they raised $75 million. Adam Back was one of the Bitcoin Core developers who was heavily involved and still is heavily involved with that, along with other Bitcoin Core developers. And, their strategy was, let's strangle Bitcoin at this artificial level of 1 megabyte blocks. So by 2017, so Blockstream's doing this behind the scenes, but in the meanwhile, Bitcoin is becoming more and more popular and people are using it as a currency and retailers are starting to accept it. And there's quite a bit of buzz going around it. But because the blocks remain small, and again, intentionally because of this hijacking, the fees went from a fraction of a penny to $55. I think that was the average fee in December of 2017. Well, obviously, if you're running a business and you're accepting a currency and the currency has fees of $55, you're not going to be able to use it anymore because it destroys your profitability. So Steam stops accepting Bitcoin. Microsoft stops accepting Bitcoin. Reddit stops accepting Bitcoin. Every merchant who believed originally in peer-to-peer cash was gone. Then in October of 2017, Epstein gives his only public interview about Bitcoin. And what he says is it's a store of value, not a currency. So the only thing we ever hear from him is this kind of, and it's not even a quote. It's an interesting kind of interview, but it's a long description of how he says, well, it's basically, it can't be a currency, but it's a great store of value. So it's the only thing that we hear. Little do we know at that point that he had already been directly involved in funding 3 specific developers to work on making sure that Bitcoin couldn't be digital cash from a technical perspective. In 2020, MIT launches Project Hamilton, which is the retail CBDC designed to replace cash. Again, the same lab that was funding Bitcoin Core developers, same funding source, same timeline. So again, tonight I'm not just exposing this. I've already exposed most of this. The real revelation is it's been proven definitively true through these emails that Epstein funded this exact thing directly, not just Joy Ito at MIT and generic projects that may or may not have been crypto related. No, he actually funded these developers. So these 20 questions we're going to talk about tonight are going to be really helpful for these holiday gatherings. So your uncle who thinks his Bitcoin ETF makes him revolutionary, I mean, these questions will wake him up. Your cousin that's bragging about being your own bank while keeping everything on Coinbase, this should hopefully wake him up. These questions will destroy that illusion. So Roger Ver and Steve Patterson did a great job of documenting and hijacking Bitcoin, all of this, and very few people have heard about it. Millions would have had whatever happened to Roger not happened to Roger. Millions of people. Think about it, the timeline. If this had gotten out, Roger was on my podcast because it was like, all right, the book is out. And it's like, this is a small podcast and, kind of trying to talk to, an audience that knows, generally what it's, they're good startup interviews, but I'm sure he was going to do massive interviews on this topic, and tens of millions of people around the world would have heard about this book, and they never did. So in any event, the Technocracy Atlas, which, let me pop this up again just so that you can see it. If you haven't already, again, it's free to use. You have to enter an email address, but I'm not even collecting passwords. It uses one of these magic links. So it's not, so it's pretty straightforward. But we now have the AI chat, and this is very simple. You just enter your email address. It sends a link to your email. You click on the link and you're in. You've probably seen these kinds of things before. And I'm going to pop in here and I'm going to show you. I'll show you that video that I put together with Epstein. I at least amused myself putting it together. All right, let me see here. Clicking on the link. All right. Let me go back here. All right, I might actually need to change browsers. Hold on. Bear with me 1 second. Let me switch the screen. All right, we'll go over here. All right, so now we're in the chat, and I'll play this video.
They called me a financier. I called myself an architect of control. Every politician who took my plane, every tech mogul at my dinners, every scientist I funded, they all left with invisible chains. Democrats, Republicans, it didn't matter. Silicon Valley, Wall Street, Cambridge, Tel Aviv, my cameras were everywhere. You think I'm dead? My network isn't. The blackmail files, the client lists, the flight logs, they're just the surface. The real system runs deeper. Biotechnology, surveillance, digital currency, artificial intelligence, all controlled through compromise. Want to know how we really run your world? How one island became a control node for global technocracy? The files are here. The connections are mapped. See how the machine actually works.
So there you go. There's that. I don't know why I'm having issues with switching screens here. Hold on. So that's kind of the introduction to this, and share this again. So we have. Let me try this. So then within this chatbot, we have, as I mentioned, 367,000 document chunks, 36.8 million words. But this is the kind of information that you're not going to get through Grok or through OpenAI or through any of these other things. Or you're not going to get it unless you know explicitly to ask for it. So, for instance, you could ask, what connections does Epstein have to intelligence agencies? And in this instance, it'll pull up information and it will tell you the sources, and then you can link directly to the sources. So the whole point behind this is I'm aggregating good content. I'm allowing you to access the content, but then you can actually link directly to the sources. So in this case, these are actually directly from the DOJ files themselves. So these are primary source documents. So it says Epstein's intelligence connections remain deliberately obscured in official documents, though several indicators emerge from the available records. Ghislaine Maxwell, when directly asked under oath whether Epstein communicated with the FBI intelligence agencies as a source, gave an elusive response, saying she had two answers for that without providing either answer. Anyway, it goes on and on and on and on. And so you can ask any of a number of questions. Now, the whole database is not just about Epstein. I just put this up because I thought when I saw the files, you have to go to a bunch of drop boxes and then they actually save them as images. They made it very difficult for people to search, and they did it intentionally. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to grab all of these and then I'm going to, run these through an AI OCR thing, and I'm going to make it so people can search. So this is, so one of the things that we're doing with this, but I'm expanding this. And what I see moving forward is having these individual investigations that we do within Technocracy, because as I've had people on, Patrick Wood and Courtney and Craig and others, a lot of people are out there doing their own research, and it's hard for anybody to keep up with. I mean, I can't even keep up with, if you have, 134 countries or whatever working on CBDCs, if you have what's going on, it's hard to keep up even with just one of these categories, let alone new things that are happening or new developments. And so this is a way where what I want you to be able to do is, visually graph these things out. So this is very crude. You can play around with it, but know that I just got this up for today. It does work somewhat, but by 30 days from now, by the time the full documents are released, and in here, this interface will be completely cleaned up. And the idea is you can take a situation, a particular topic, like, okay, well, how was Bitcoin captured? And then you can actually start to map. In this case, we have, the entries here are in orange, you have Epstein and the financiers, then you have the institutions that were involved, then you have Blockstream and their orbit, and then you have CBDC projects, which are kind of the outcome of all of this. And so you can click and see, like, all right, what's the relationship here with, Steve Bannon? It's a little wonky the way that this works, but he lobbied on this issue, and you can click on that, and then it'll actually go to the chat bot, and you can get more information about these connections. Now, eventually what I see happening here is, in addition to a better layout, is the ability for people to, and it's already there, to suggest a new node or a new connection or new information. So the whole point about this is about crowdsourcing. The whole point is people have different pieces of information, and I want to be able to use this to allow people to add that information and to view that information visually. But we're going to do it one project at a time, and I'm picking this Bitcoin project as the first project because obviously it's something that I'm passionate about, but I also think that it's critically important. I think that at the end of this, if you can see where all the money went, if you can see and kind of definitively prove that, Epstein was involved in this, Larry Summers is involved in this, Steve Bannon is involved in this, and they directly funded the developers, you can see the sources, you can see the result, and then you can see how that then carried through to CBDC development and everything else, and then all of it's documented and sourced. Then at this point, when a Bitcoin maxi tries to censor on this, I'm just going to point them to this website, and anybody can view the site, anybody can use the site. And if you dispute the information, at least all of the information is here. We're no longer debating. I've complained about this in a lot of these podcasts where people are outsourcing their thinking to influencers. People are watching Nick Fuentes today, and they're watching Dave Smith, and nobody has any information. So people are sitting around watching these 3-hour podcasts, and you can't find a fact between from the person at all. Or if there's a debate, it's highly skeptical whether any of the information there is actually grounded in anything. We have a lot of stuff to figure out. It's important to know if Bitcoin was hijacked or not, and if so, by who, and why. And then when you figure that out, and so Bitcoin is one aspect of it, but man, I'll tell you, once we put one of these up to look at what's going on with, Operation Stargate and healthcare data and a whole variety of different things. I mean, I could see a whole project here mapping out. You'd be stunned what Peter Thiel is involved with. I mean, I'm going to have to come up with a whole new interface. This obviously sucks. I don't like the way that this layout is not usable. So, bear with me. If my internet connection was faster, this would have been a little bit better, but you get the idea of it being kind of a graph of relationships that you'll be able to sort and you'll be able to view and then tie into the AI. And then around that, there's going to be a community as well, where you can, again, I'm not going to say there will be, this exists now. So if you wanted to go in and play around with this and you had a question or you had a comment or something that you wanted to contribute to this, you just log in with your email and, put in whatever your findings are, whatever your questions are, whatever your comments are. And we can start doing this with anything. I mean, the focus of this is going to be on exposing things that are related to technocracy, but that's pretty vast. So I wanted to show this because this is the direction that this is headed in. And again, I apologize for the way that this kind of works. I don't know why there's a better way to get this to view. But you'll be able to track, who flew where, who lobbied, who invested. There are going to be different kind of categories of different actions. And again, the ability for you to weight the quality of the information. So this is about getting to the truth, but making it public and then adding a crowdsourced component to it. Because there's the information that you can get online. Like I can scan these documents, but the thing is that with this Bitcoin thing, we directly know people that were directly involved in this, and their information is not in a database. It's not something that you can scrape somewhere or that's in a book. That's probably the most valuable information of all. So if you have enough people out there that start contributing to something like this, this becomes really powerful, and we can stop speculating. But again, I feel vindicated about the fact that, I've been talking about this Epstein connection, and now we know from the email that he definitively was involved. So anyway, hopefully we'll be getting to these 20 questions soon. So anyway, this whole be your own bank, Bitcoin being the solution to central banks, this entire thing, they've turned rebellion into compliance. They turned freedom money into surveillance gold. And they think that you're too invested to admit you were fooled. And so I think tonight, at least, we can start to prove them wrong on this. So I've already talked about this and mentioned this, but I want to go into some of the detail here. So if you're sitting there on the holidays and people are talking about, because I see this and it's just, again, my blood boils, but somebody will say, oh yeah, the US is really heavily invested in Bitcoin. I just read somewhere that the US government has 327,000 Bitcoin. All right, so here's a question that might come up. Why does the government own 327,000 Bitcoin, or why, or how, actually might even be a better way of phrasing that. So the US government is the second largest Bitcoin holder on earth with 327,000 coins. They're only behind Satoshi Nakamoto. They didn't mine it. They didn't buy it. They seized it through civil asset forfeiture, which is the legal theft mechanism where they take your property without convicting you of any crime. So Ross Ulbricht, the Silk Road, that provided the initial base of this, 144,000 Bitcoin. Now, again, Ross has been pardoned. In theory, he should have potentially a claim to those. Then there was a Bitfinex hack recovery. So somebody hacked an exchange, right? And a bunch of people lost their coins. But somehow they ended up in the hands of the US government, not the people whose coins were stolen. again, this is how civil asset forfeiture works. You've probably heard about this happening in other instances where somebody has cash in their car and, the government, police pulls somebody over. They have $10,000 worth of cash. And they just take the cash. They're not without a conviction, and they hold it. They keep it. This is a horrible practice. And it's a really horrible practice when you consider that these cryptocurrencies are on transparent blockchains and available for the government to see. And particularly with Bitcoin, they can track everything. So this is a recipe for disaster. And in fact, it's already played out with this recent DOJ seizure. Now, Ian Freeman, who I talk about a lot here, who I believe is certainly wrongly imprisoned and targeted, they have, I don't know, at the time that they seized it, it was $5 million worth of Bitcoin. That might be $10 million worth of Bitcoin now. So, I mean, I know people who have Bitcoin in this strategic reserve as the way that it's being spun. So when somebody says, oh, well, this, clearly the U.S. believes in this. Well, I don't think the government stealing other people's property is necessarily an indication of belief. I think it's an indication of a crime having been committed against our own citizens. So in any event, this most recent one in October, it was 130,000 more Bitcoin grabbed. They're using this money to fund state surveillance. Excuse me. And so, so this is essentially where we're at. So the government now owns the second largest stash, and now you really can't even effectively use Bitcoin anymore. So let's look at what happened to payments. So here's another question that might come up. Now, this might not come up because what I found is a lot of people don't even realize this was a use case, but somebody would say, well, why can't you buy coffee with Bitcoin anymore? And in 2013, you could buy pizza, coffee, anything with Bitcoin with, fees that were like a penny. And this happened all over the place. This was very popular here in New Hampshire, and increasingly popular all over the world. And there were a lot of ads and things that were promoting that, for international payments, Bitcoin is a lot cheaper than, for instance, using Western Union. These were some of the original use cases. So the fees hit a high of $55 per transaction. Today they're low at like 84 cents or so, but even still recently they spiked to $50 to $60 in 2024 due to something called the ordinals frenzy. People were putting meme coins and NFTs on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then people were actually starting to use it again, and then the fees went up because they haven't done anything to alleviate the 7 transaction per second limit. So when all of that happened, they decided to artificially cap the block size and then implement something called replace by fee, so that now that you can only have 7 transactions per second, then the only way to get your transaction done faster is to pay more money. And then this is the system that they created. So they killed Bitcoin as digital cash, which the first line of the white paper talks about it being a peer-to-peer digital cash system. So this was a complete hijacking. So again, when you're talking to people during the holidays, they might be fascinated to learn that it was used as cash and that was the original intention, and that there's a whole white paper that describes this. So another question that might come up, or you might want to throw out there, why did MIT fund Bitcoin's sabotage and CBDCs? So, obviously MIT is involved in funding a lot of things, but what always struck me as interesting is the timing of them funding the developers. So you had this thing called the Bitcoin Foundation, which was a nonprofit that was started to fund Bitcoin developers. Bitcoin is what's called an open source project. So it's not a corporation. It's just code. And there are a lot of people that will sit around and even try today tell you that this is the greatest thing in the world, open source code. And then they try to portray it that you have these altruistic developers that are developing code for free. And because the code is for free, there are other altruistic developers that are testing and auditing the code to make sure that it's secure. And what's really weird about it is these are libertarians. The whole thing actually doesn't even make sense that this would necessarily be a good idea. So when there's no one there to pay the developers, well, how are these developers going to make money? Well, it turns out they're getting paid by someone. And it isn't necessarily transparent who they're being funded by. So this Bitcoin Foundation came about by a group of people, early developers. Roger was there, and others with the idea of saying, well, hey, let's keep this on track. Let's keep this aligned with the white paper, and let's actually try to prevent the thing from being hijacked. And so, we'll pool our resources and provide funding for developers to kind of stick to the roadmap. Long story short, this organization ran into some issues. There were some people on the board that had legal issues. The organization had financial problems. And interestingly, I believe Brock Pierce was the chairman at the time all of this happened. But essentially, the Bitcoin Foundation went, I don't know if it was officially bankrupt, but they ran out of money. They could no longer fund the development of the project. And so they found, there were a lot of people kind of interested in poking around on this. And so they found MIT, which had funded something called, or started something called the Digital Currency Foundation. They stepped in to do the funding. And they directly paid for the funding of a couple of developers, including a guy named Vladimir Vanderlaan and Corey Fields, and also there was another developer in there as well, but it was paid for by MIT, and they blocked the scaling of Bitcoin. They blocked the natural, what Bitcoin was supposed to be is digital cash. There was never supposed to even be a 1 megabyte block limit. There was no limit on the block size, but now that there was a new sheriff in town and a new funding source, they decided to go another way. And they decided to start funding something called SegWit and something called Lightning Network. So then the idea was, well, we're going to keep this 1 megabyte artificial thing. We're going to keep it there. And then we're going to build these second layer solutions. And so now what we've learned is that the person who provided that funding was Jeffrey Epstein. That's pretty interesting. Then what is more interesting is a few years after that, or kind of right around the time that's going on, this digital currency initiative starts funding 3 CBDC pilots, one called Project Hamilton, and I mentioned this in the intro, which was a collaboration between the Boston Federal Reserve and MIT. And this was going to be the new pilot for the digital dollar. One of the co-authors of that white paper is Corey Fields. So if you want to know what the connection here is, Jeffrey Epstein literally funded directly the guy to work on limiting Bitcoin. And that guy then ended up becoming a co-author of the white paper to build the digital dollar. So there are no more, this is no more speculation about what's going on. This is a direct, overt hijacking of Bitcoin, shifting of the narrative, destroying Bitcoin as digital cash, all while enabling the Federal Reserve to build a CBDC directly. Now, they didn't stop there. There was something called Project Seizure, which was a wholesale CBDC project. And then there was something called a Regulated Liability Network, which was a third CBDC project. And it was really kind of a platform that was going to connect CBDCs globally. So to allow central banks around the world to be able to do transactions with each other. And then ultimately that would include tokenizing other assets. So now, because of course, if everybody's using a CBDC, then if you're buying or selling stocks or bonds or anything else, you're going to be settling those things using CBDCs. And so that was the third initiative of this MIT group in conjunction with the New York Federal Reserve and a bunch of big banks out of New York. Turns out the technical lead on Regulated Liability Network is a guy named Mike Hearn, who was also an early Bitcoin Core developer. So, I mean, literally the developers working on these CBDC projects at global scale were explicitly Bitcoin Core developers, and the funding for this kind of initial pivot was directly from Jeffrey Epstein. So I'd be curious to see people's reactions on this, but you know, again, most people don't know that. So another thing that might come up, because I see this all the time, people are all excited. Oh, wow. You know, there are always these posts now on X where it's, you know, $3 trillion Goldman Sachs, you know, invests in Bitcoin, or, you know, $11 trillion in assets. But, you know, they always in these posts describe the size of the financial firm and then state that they're investing in Bitcoin. And usually they're not even characterizing it properly, because in the case of, you know, if you say BlackRock's buying it, no, BlackRock's actually selling it to their customers. It's not that they're not necessarily buying it for themselves. They're operating ETFs and they're selling it to boomers and people with retirement funds. So even the way, there's almost nothing accurate about the posts that these maxis put out there to hype why this is exciting and why you should be excited about it. So, I've just got to say, we've got you know, a comment here from Anthony Frank. All transactions are a tracking mechanism, dumbass. Well, that's not a tracking by whom. That's the actual question. Yes, money is a medium of exchange, but if the whole point is voluntary commerce, then yes, it's a way for two parties to be able to voluntarily engage in trade, which is completely different than having digital, programmable, trackable, censorable money issued by a central bank or a government. Dumbass. So anyway, so when people say, why do banks love Bitcoin now? Go back and look at some of the early stuff. In 2011, Jamie Dimon called Bitcoin a fraud, and then banks laughed it off, even saying it was, quote, magic internet money for criminals. And now you fast forward, Larry Fink didn't like it, but now the BlackRock ETF holds 783,000 Bitcoin. Total ETF holdings are now 214 billion. Well, what changed? Well, what changed is they captured it. What changed is what Bitcoin was in 2011 is not what Bitcoin is today. It is literally a technically different thing altogether. So that is what's changed. It's no longer a threat to banking. When I used Bitcoin for the first time in 2012, it was better, faster, and cheaper than what I could do using a bank account. I could instantly send money, which I did, you know, phone to phone, mobile phone to mobile phone, for 1 cent. That wasn't possible to do using the banking system. They have all their fees. With credit cards, you have 30 cents plus 2.9%, whatever it happens to be. It was a real threat at that time. Banks didn't like that it was a threat. Now, at 7 transactions per second, now with huge fees, now knowing that it's completely trackable, it's zero threat to banks. And now what they're able to do is the same thing that they do with any financial asset or financial product. They bundle it into something like an ETF, and then they sell it to the unsuspecting public and they collect a fee. So it's not a threat. It's something that's been neutered and something they can generate fees on. So you know, so this, again, when I tell you that this is a gigantic inversion, I mean, it really is phenomenal. And for people that weren't involved in it at the beginning, it's hard to understand what a reversal this story is. Another question that might come up is, you know, and I love this on the political realm, you have this situation where everybody likes to poke fun at the other side, but not look at their own side with respect to, you know, financial fraud or self-dealing. So of course, you know, everybody looks at Nancy Pelosi and it's like, well, yeah, her insider trading is is clearly should be criminal, right? I mean, it's ridiculous when you look at the timing of her transactions and what information she had access to and so on and so forth. I mean, it wasn't technically illegal. It's a whole other separate problem. But I mean, I'll even see today, even though she's, not running again, people are still, MAGA's still like putting out memes about Nancy Pelosi. Nobody's looking at what's going on with Bitcoin. So this Senator Cynthia Loomis from Wyoming goes to this Bitcoin conference in 2024 and announces a Bitcoin Act for a strategic reserve. Well, it turns out, so her strategy for this is we're going to use taxpayer money to buy 1 million Bitcoin, and then we're going to hold it for 20 years, not sell it. And then at the end of that 20 years, it's going to go up so much in value, we're going to be able to pay off all of our debt. Now, I mean, this is a tragically stupid idea for a whole variety of reasons, but more alarmingly, she owns $500,000 worth of Bitcoin. So to put a comparison on it, it would be as if Nancy Pelosi held a press conference and said, well, I'm going to suggest that the United States government takes $1 trillion of taxpayer money and buys my stock portfolio and holds it for 20 years. It's essentially what's going on there. You have Howard Lutnick, who, I mean, I've talked about this at length with respect to Tether. His company has the exclusive contract to manage the treasuries that back Tether. And then he pushed the bill that required that all stablecoins be backed by U.S. treasuries. I mean, that's a phenomenally blatant, corrupt action there. But he also is a huge holder of Bitcoin. Trump now has a huge holdings in Bitcoin, and then has his World Liberty Financial. And again, people say, well, this kind of stuff, I thought we were supposed to not have these kinds of direct dealings, but the Trump family now has multiple meme coins. They actually have their own stable coin, and nobody's talking about this. Nobody's talking about, do we really think it's a great idea that they're pushing either for the theft through civil asset forfeiture or the use of taxpayer money to buy an asset that they themselves hold? That seems not ideal. And it's not just them. I mean, it's Democrat. There's a whole bunch of people that are doing this, but obviously the leaders on this now are on the Republican side of the aisle. And now, as of today, there was Warren Davidson's announcement that this bill hasn't passed, but you'll be able to pay your taxes in Bitcoin, not pay capital gains, and then the government can take that Bitcoin and put it into the strategic reserve. I mean, it's a phenomenon. And in New Hampshire, we have our state rep who just put something forward to do $100 million bond offering backed by Bitcoin, and he's a huge Bitcoin holder. So a lot of these people aren't necessarily liberty people, although Cynthia Loomis, positions herself as a liberty person. These liberty people in New Hampshire claim that they are. They're clearly not, in terms of what they're doing as a matter of cronyism and self-dealing. But people might be interested in that. I mean, the same crowd that doesn't like the insider trading and doesn't like, these other deals, Burisma and Biden being on energy boards, might be interested to understand what our active politicians are doing right now with the money supply, whether it's in Bitcoin or stable coins, which are a digital form of the dollar. Another question that might come up is what happened to, and this is interesting, again, depending upon who you're at the table and how familiar this concept is, the propaganda on this has been, be your own bank has been a big theme on this, is that, you don't need to be a bank. You don't need banks anymore. You can just use your own self-custody crypto. Well, what happened to that? The other thing that people used to say is not your keys, not your coins, meaning don't leave anything on an exchange. You need to have your cryptocurrency in your own wallet. Every year, there was this kind of initiative where people were encouraged to take their crypto off of the exchange just to keep the exchange honest, because, the exchanges aren't necessarily required to back what they have one-to-one. And Lord knows most of the large exchanges have collapsed historically. And so this was part of the ethos. Well, what happened to that? What happened to that ethos? Not your keys, not your coins became trust BlackRock. 90% of retail Bitcoin sits on exchanges or in ETFs. BlackRock controls 783,000, as I've already mentioned. It's gotten so absurd. We've gone from a cryptocurrency you have in your own hands to let's look at what's going on with Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy, or I guess now called Strategy. So, I mean, we now have these treasury companies where we have companies that go out there and raise money for the purpose of buying Bitcoin. But then they don't even have the Bitcoin in their own self-custody. So in the case of Strategy, Saylor's company raises money from the public, buys Bitcoin, and then has it stored at Coinbase. I mean, this stuff is removed from use, removed from circulation. And in some cases, people are 2, 3, 4 levels removed from ever touching Bitcoin. It's the opposite of be your own bank. So the idea that every person is their own financial institution, that has been completely disbanded. Now, the thing is, maybe that's maybe people like the new model, but the problem is that some of the old propaganda is still being used. So people are still saying it's be your own bank and freedom money and all this other stuff. Well, you can't use the old rhetoric with the new reality, but yet people are doing it just to continue to get more people to buy their coins. It's a very sophisticated, I don't know if I'd call it Ponzi, but it's a very sophisticated marketing scheme to get people to buy their coin. So another question that might come up is, well, why does Bitcoin only handle 7 transactions per second? Or put differently, you might offer up the question, did you know Bitcoin can only handle 7 transactions per second? Now, I wouldn't necessarily expect that people have a lot of knowledge about that. I mean, that may or may not even be interesting because people might not think about, well, how many transactions does the current system do? But Visa can do 65,000 transactions per second at peak. And that's just Visa. Then you have MasterCard, then you have direct deposit. Now we have something called FedNow for banks to be able to do transfers between banks. And at the very beginning, Bitcoin was supposed to be able to compete with Visa kind of out of the gate, not 30 years in the future, but within a very short period of time getting going. It was always intended to be able to be used at that. So why is it stuck at 7 transactions per second? And if you want to know the full story, read Hijacking Bitcoin. But you had this whole scaling wars thing, big blocks versus small blocks, and there were a lot of tactics used by people, a lot of propaganda and censorship, and there are people who would argue both sides of it. And but now we know that in a big way, in part, Hijacking Bitcoin uncovered that there was a guy by the name of John Dillon who paid one of the Bitcoin core developers, a guy named Peter Todd, to implement this thing called replace by fee, which I mentioned earlier. So this was the solution to, we're going to keep the blocks small. And then the solution to that is, well, we need to build a way for people to be able to pay to get their transactions processed faster. So this guy, John Dillon, pays Peter Todd, because remember, it's an open source project. There's no funding for it. Well, it turns out this guy, John Dillon, is tied to the intelligence agencies, and John Dillon doesn't want Bitcoin to be digital cash. He wants it to be a store of value. So that was one early indicator of something going on with respect to, again, these developers are funded somehow, and this was somebody from the intelligence community that didn't want digital cash. And then now we know that Jeffrey Epstein funded some of these other developers to continue this hobbled narrative. So there you have it. It was stuck at 7 transactions per second, but because, yes, there was a block size war, but also at a point of weakness with the Bitcoin Foundation, MIT, funded by Jeffrey Epstein, came in and hobbled it. And I would argue hobbled it intentionally so that it wouldn't be a threat to the banks, and so that they could build CBDCs, which they did 3 pilots. Slide the next point of this, and I'm actually not advancing through on these these slides very well, but here we go. See, we have why do 3 mining pools control 60% of Bitcoin? I mean, you essentially have, and I these might not be completely up to date, but you essentially have like Foundry USA controls 30% of Bitcoin's hash rate, Ant Pool adds 18%, F2 Pool brings 12%. These 3 entities control 60% of your, quote, decentralized network. So one phone call from the US or Chinese government to these 3 companies ends the censorship resistance. And, there are people that argue about nodes and a whole variety of other things. But the important part here is there are a lot of people that try to paint this out to be decentralized, meaning that it's, millions of computers and like, individuals in their homes that are mining Bitcoin, when in reality, now it's become very concentrated and controlled by a small number of entities. And then that has turned into and morphed into a whole other situation. And by the way, compare this to the Federal Reserve. You have 12 board members versus 3 pool operators for Bitcoin. And now it's become even more bizarre. So now you have mining operations that are implementing know your customer stuff when they mine the Bitcoin. And so there's, and because Bitcoin requires so much energy, it's not like you can hide having a massive data center. So this has become a pretty significant issue. So 3 companies control the network while burning enough energy to power Argentina. So, we can look at the environmental aspects of this as well. Why does Bitcoin waste more energy than Argentina? So Bitcoin burns 211 terawatt hours annually, which is more than Argentina's 46 million people use. So each single transaction uses 1,335 kilowatts, which is 1.5 months of average US household electricity. And for what? For 7 transactions per second. I mean, that's the issue with this. This might not even be as much of an issue, but the fact that you're only doing 7 transactions per second, this isn't about securing the network. It's environmental destruction for an intentionally crippled technology. So that might be an interesting topic of conversation. So burning the planet for 7 transactions per second. And by the way, I brought this up before. Look at what's going on now. So we have this situation where we have the AI race, and then we also have crypto. Although I think even the argument that it's a national security, there have been people that Bitcoin turned into such a psyop that people were actually having people from military, what was the soft war, people that were actually from the military trying to frame Bitcoin as being important as a national security issue, and that this is going to solve wars and everything else. I mean, and the whole thing is just absurd because a lot of people, Trump gets a lot of play out of blaming China for everything, or saying that, we're going to compete with China. We don't have the capacity in our grid to handle AI or Bitcoin mining. It is not cost effective to mine in the United States versus a lot of other countries. In fact, I saw one chart, I have to look it up, but it's like it costs 28%. Iran can mine Bitcoin for, almost a quarter of the cost that it costs here in the United States. And then we also now have the added pressure of AI. We're actually not even competitive. So even if you bought into this national defense issue and argument for Bitcoin, it doesn't carry any water because we're not competitive. And then we're also now not competitive because of AI. And I put out those memes about how, soon we're going to see propaganda posters about how you need to shut off your water and keep your thermostat high to beat China to AGI. But they might very well do the same thing, because Bitcoin requires increasingly more energy. So, we've got to beat the Chinese at mining hijacked digital gold. And So this is no longer a feature. It's certainly not a feature that you can use from a patriotic pro-American perspective at all. Another question is, well, so people say Bitcoin is decentralized. Well, if that's the case, how is it that 7 people essentially control the code for Bitcoin? There are 7 developers that have what's called commit access to Bitcoin Core. 7. They decide what code gets merged, what improvements get blocked, what Bitcoin becomes, and it's funded by Chain Code Labs and corporate sponsors. So it's not really open source at this point. It's theater. Again, the Federal Reserve has 12 board members. Bitcoin has 7 gatekeepers. So much of the arguments and what people say is, oh, it's decentralized, it's backed by math, it's all of this other stuff. When you dig into it, most of these arguments are completely and totally hollow. Or the other one is, oh, well, it's great, it's open source, as if these developers are going to work for free. I think that is that is not a feature of Bitcoin. That is a flaw of Bitcoin. The fact that it didn't have its own funding made it highly susceptible to being hijacked, which it was. But there are people today that will scoff at a project that has a different funding mechanism and say, well, it's not open source like Bitcoin. Well, how'd that work? How do we like John Dillon do it? So are we on the John Dillon, Jeffrey Epstein track that's the way that it should have turned out? Is this the use case? Is this the best case scenario? Is this the standard of care, I guess, that you would call it, for how you should operate and fund a crypto project? It's a failure. It's one of the worst aspects of Bitcoin. Another question that might come up: why do exchanges need more ID than banks? Right? Again, be your own bank, freedom money. Great. Okay. If you open a bank account, you have a driver's license, and it's done. Buy a Bitcoin on any major exchange. You need a passport, a selfie with a timestamp, utility bills, bank statements, tax returns, income verification, and sometimes video calls. The whole point of this was permissionless money. And now you have to provide biometric information. And what did we learn this week from our, we're going to defeat the globalist president? We're not going to be doing data sharing with other countries to be able to track and make sure that people are paying taxes on their Bitcoin holdings overseas. So again, a lot of the people you might be talking to might not know what the original purpose of Bitcoin is, but I guess if you're having these conversations, it might be good to explain what it was supposed to be, and then explain what it is now, which is something that requires more identification than banks. And I think that most people would agree that what the banks require is ridiculous enough. And I've done many podcasts on this and certainly talked about in my book that prior to even doing this regulated stablecoin thing, we already have 13 different ways in which the federal government is tracking our financial transactions through the existing system, whether it's NSA bulk data collection or know your customer laws or anti-money laundering laws or treasury reports, on and on and on and on. It's an illusion to think that our money isn't already tracked. And it's an illusion to think that our money isn't already digital. I think it's like 96% of our money is already digital. Then the Federal Reserve runs on an Oracle database. So fiat sucks from a tracking perspective, but hey, guess what? Crypto's worse. If you're buying a transparent blockchain like Bitcoin on a centralized exchange, it is definitively less private than fiat currency. And I've told you guys many times that over the course of this year, people have come to me personally with situations where they were involved in some kind of a legal dispute. And then, what I learned is that we have, this company called Chainalysis that tracks Bitcoin transactions, and they work with law enforcement and they build a database. And so they can take one of your transactions and then they can track your entire history because it's on a public blockchain. So there are people that are going through disputes with business partners, people that are going through divorces that can now hire private investigators who can put this information into a database and have more of transaction history about your Bitcoin holdings than they can get from a bank. This is how far off this is. Again, next question. And a lot of people are skeptical of this. And, I'm not even going to say, I don't know who Satoshi is. And at this point, I'm not even sure if the thing was a psyop from the beginning. excuse me, or whether it was or whether it was just hijacked. I don't know. I don't have an answer on that. Who knows? Maybe we'll crowdsource and figure out who Satoshi is. I have people sending me all kinds of information all the time, and maybe we can figure it out if we put enough of the pieces together and make it public. But it actually doesn't even matter to a certain degree. I mean, it certainly, whatever the original intent was, and if you take the white paper at face value, it is not that anymore. But your Bitcoin transaction from 2013 is still visible. The donations that you made, traceable, coffee purchases, every transfer permanently etched on the blockchain. The IRS bought Chainalysis. The FBI uses CipherTrace. Your complete financial history is on public record. They call it pseudonymous, but once they can link one transaction, your entire history is exposed. And again, somebody will say, you'll find some Bitcoin maxi that says, well, yeah, but if you're smart enough, you can do this properly. And that's BS. I mean, some of the smartest people in crypto, people like Ross Ulbricht and people like Ian and others that were involved in this very early, the average person is nowhere even close to being able to do anything to protect their privacy regarding this. And it isn't even just a question of, did you buy it on an exchange and there's a record there? Because of what's going on with law enforcement action, if law enforcement comes in and let's say they seize somebody who's done a whole bunch of transactions, one of the things they'll do is they'll say, well, hey, we'll, reduce your time or maybe not give you time if you identify who your counterparties are. So now you have these companies like Chainalysis that are then taking that information and logging it. So just because you've never used a centralized exchange doesn't mean that your identity can't be tracked. And certainly more and more and more information in time and effort is being spent tracking these things. And given that it's only 7 transactions per second, it's not like it's rocket science to map this stuff. Then you throw AI on top of this. And so, again, it's kind of a joke from that perspective. It is an open, public, permanent ledger of all of your transactions. So that's not particularly helpful. The other one I get is another question that might come up, or I'm trying to figure out the right way to phrase this, but people will say, well, they can't stop, the government can't stop Bitcoin. I have people that I know that are pretty sophisticated and they still believe this to this day. They're kind of like, well, what's the mechanism for this? How can they possibly freeze my Bitcoin? Well, so a couple of things. One, you have OFAC, which will add an address to the sanctions list. And so then every exchange immediately freezes those coins. Tainted Bitcoin becomes worthless. You can't sell it. You can't spend it. You can't use it. And, let's say you use a mixing service or you buy your Bitcoin somewhere. Maybe you don't buy it through a centralized exchange. And it's later determined that Bitcoin was part of a pool of other cryptocurrency that you may not have had any direct involvement with, but they labeled a whole pool of it defective in their view. And then they put these things on a sanctions list and then you're done. And because they're tracking all of this, then they can use civil asset forfeiture to grab your coins without a trial. Tornado Cash users had wallets frozen across all platforms. And your decentralized money depends on centralized exchanges that obey government rules. So one bureaucrat's decision to make your Bitcoin worthless, and that's it. So it may be a decentralized architecture, but it has completely centralized control points. And the fact that it is completely transparent and on a public blockchain makes it very simple. Now, at the end of the day, somebody can make the statement of, well, yeah, but they can't technically force me to move my Bitcoin, right? There's no technical mechanism like they can go to a bank and just freeze the money or shut down the account. So this is now the realm. This is where, the niche that people are playing in when they're trying to rationalize or justify how this thing is somehow censorship resistant. But when the government comes to you and says, okay, we know this is you. We know this is your identity. We've used CipherTrace. We've used these other things. This is you. Here's your choice. You can either go to prison or you can give us your keys. Do you think it's worthwhile, the fact that you could say, well, yeah, I'm not going to give them my Bitcoin. I'm going to go to jail. Is this what you're resting on as your big, win moment for censorship resistance? It's ridiculous. So the government can freeze it very easily. And now they have mechanisms to make that even simpler. And now we have President Trump working on international agreements to make the data sharing even easier. And then all of these stable coins have to comply with all of this regulation. And so, essentially we now have Bitcoin has become, it's the CBDC version of gold. It's surveillance gold. And, I'd argue it's non-fungible, because if they can flag one Bitcoin or a group of Bitcoin and say, hey, these are blacklisted, you can't spend these. And whereas others are whitelisted, then one Bitcoin is not the same as another Bitcoin. So it's lost all of what were interesting properties of it. Another thing that might come up is this Lightning Network. You may have heard of this. This was the second layer solution that the MIT group and Epstein and others were so eager to promote as Blockstream as a solution to keeping Bitcoin hobbled, technocratically hobbled, I would say. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I've talked about it. Hijacking Bitcoin goes into it. It was conceptually flawed from the very beginning. I don't think that there was any way it could work, and I don't think it was ever designed to work. But it was presented as the scaling solution, fast, cheap, and private. But now, if you look at Lightning Network, you have Strike, which, if you ever see this guy, Jack Mallers, the guy who's always does these interviews with like a baseball cap in a big room in a closet with nothing in it. Strike requires more documents than JP Morgan. Cash App demands full KYC for any Lightning transaction over $1,000. Every major routing node requires identity verification. So this layer 2 solution is actually layer 2 surveillance. And they built a system that is more tracked than traditional banking and called it innovation. Lightning Network did not solve Bitcoin's problems. It actually added more surveillance. So the way Lightning Network works is, if I wanted to send, you money, but you and I weren't directly connected, we would go through these nodes, these Lightning nodes. But if I wanted to send you $10 and the intermediate point between you and me, that person didn't actually have $10, they only had $5 worth of Bitcoin, I couldn't use that node. So then to route the money for me to get to you is really difficult unless you have a whole bunch of people that have a whole bunch of value that's locked up in this second layer solution. So what happened was you end up having these big nodes that form like Stripe and Cash App, so that basically it ends up being a situation where a whole bunch of people connect to these big nodes. Well, those big nodes turn out to be large corporations that are regulated. And this is where you now have KYC. So Lightning Network is useless. It's a surveillance layer on top of surveillance digital gold. Another question might come up: why did every major company ditch Bitcoin? And I say this from the standpoint of, again, you almost have to say, even before bringing that up, you have to explain to people that Overstock.com and Microsoft and Steam and others, even certain Subway sandwich franchises and many other businesses going into 2017 took Bitcoin. You could actually buy products directly. Drop-down box. You want to use Visa, MasterCard, use Bitcoin. Most people don't realize that. But when the fees hit $55 in 2017, most fled. So now there are only 2,300 or so merchants in the US that take it. And a lot of the ones that take it, they take it through payment processors. They don't even take it directly. It's not, even the acceptance of it is no longer peer-to-peer. It's through an intermediary that has tracking and fees. There's no innovation there. That you've eliminated all of the qualities of it that made it worthwhile. There's another component to this. That one of the big things that everybody holds their hat on, even in this new narrative shift of it's not cash, it's digital gold, is there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. This is the big rallying cry. This is what Michael Saylor says. That's simply not true. That is not necessarily true. And, to explain this, every 10 minutes, you have blocks that are mined. You have these computers solving these math problems, and the miners that solve the math problems get a what's called a block reward. That started out as 50, and then every 4 years that number gets cut in half until such time way out in the future it stops at a hard cap of 21 million. And the original idea behind this is that it was a subsidy to reward early miners to secure the network until such time as the transaction volume, again, that we were anticipating Visa levels, would be the primary source of revenue for the miners. So the way the miners ultimately were going to make money was not by essentially winning a lottery ticket by being the one to solve the math puzzle, is because there would be tens of thousands of transactions every second. You would be getting a fee, a smaller fee than you would be paying to Visa or MasterCard, but on a large volume of transactions. And that's what the whole idea was for the business model. So that by now, where we are, coming off 2009, fast forward to 16 years, we should be expecting hundreds of thousands of transactions per second, and that miners would be making massive amounts of money in transaction fees. Well, when you hobble the transactions to 7 transactions per second, there's now no longer the potential to generate transaction volume, transaction fees, which means as more and more computers are securing the network and burning more energy, the only way that, and by the way, which is a very high cost business, you have to invest a lot of money in equipment, which you have to stay on top of to make sure that you are using the best, what are called ASICs, that are the most efficient and effective at processing and solving these math puzzles. And then you have buildings, and you have insurance, and you have all of those costs, and then energy costs, right? So this is not necessarily a great thing to begin with. And when you consider that now at this point, what it's become is not even about the transaction fees, but people are just having all of these capital equipment expenses to effectively buy a lottery ticket. Well, what happens if the price doesn't go up? In fact, with what's going on right now with the pricing, if the price of Bitcoin drops much more, you will see mining operations that go bankrupt. It's very simple. They can't afford the fixed cost to continue to do this, and there are no transaction fees. So what's going to happen at this point? Because what everybody touts about this is, well, what's great about it is the security, and we have all of these miners. Well, the only reason that you have these miners is because the number has gone up artificially, but you don't have that transaction volume. So since the transaction volume will never be there because you're only doing 7 transactions per second, it's already been floated that there should be an increase in the supply of Bitcoin beyond 21 million. In fact, that same developer, Peter Todd, who I mentioned that this guy, John Dillon, paid to make that change to Bitcoin for this replacement by fee so that you could bid to have your transaction go through faster in this artificially capped model. A couple things about Peter Todd. He has been floating publicly the idea that the 21 million cap should be increased, which isn't a hard thing to do technically. I mean, this is not something that is technically impossible. There are people that will make you believe that it's technically impossible to increase the supply. That's not the case at all. It's actually fairly trivial. You have to get nodes and others on board, but the reality is if the price crashes and then the miners drop out, then Bitcoin becomes insecure. So if the entire purpose of Bitcoin has now been to be digital gold because you can't use it for transactions, but now it's not secure and is subject to what's called a 51% attack, then what's the value at all of Bitcoin, even in a store of value perspective? So inevitably, when you look at the ETFs that BlackRock and others have put in there, they have put in as a risk factor that they could increase the supply from 21 million to some other amount, or they could fork or change the code entirely. So this is a fundamentally important thing for people to understand, because the Bitcoin maxi thing has become a cult-like religion. Somebody here has said, are you reading chat? No, I'm not reading chat. I have some notes that I've written down, but this is stuff that I've been talking about, and I wanted to make sure I have my kind of list of facts. But no, I'm not reading chat on this. So this is what's going on with this 21 million cap. So read yourself. Go to the ETFs. Ask your family members. So I built this ownnothing.org website, which ultimately a week from Monday, I'm going to roll out the next version of it. But the whole idea is you can put a link to these click wrap agreements that we sign, and you'll get a score that shows you how many of your rights have been given away, your privacy, economic interests, so on and so forth. And so that's one part of it. But the other part I'm going to integrate in it is the ability for you to chat with the contract and get an explanation of what it means in human terms. So these ETF agreements are huge. Your banking agreement is massive. Your terms and conditions for everything are massive. Rental car agreement, everything. As I've stated, I think the average American signs 200 of these click wrap agreements every year, and we couldn't possibly read them. It would take, originally when I reported on this, it was an hour a day, 365 days a year just to read the contracts. Is more like 2 hours a day, 365 days a year. But what I'm suggesting is, you don't need my interface to do this. Take the contract and cut and paste it and put it into any language model and ask it questions, and ask your BlackRock ETF if there's a phrase, a term in there that says the supply of Bitcoin might be increased from 21 million. Also, while you're at it, ask if there's a provision in the ETF that says that there's a risk factor that the government might confiscate the Bitcoin in the ETF. Because I don't know if I have this as one of my 20 questions, but since now people have been conditioned to think about this in terms of gold, well, we know what FDR did to gold in the 1930s. And in many respects, it would be easier to confiscate Bitcoin than it would physical gold, because with physical gold, you at least actually had to go somewhere. And when you study and what happened under FDR is they would go to vaults, and they would go to locations where safety deposit boxes, places where there was centralized storage of gold, and they would confiscate that directly. But a lot of people that had their gold at home, even though you were legally obligated to turn that gold in, about 25% of people didn't. They, quote, kept it in their own self-custody. Well, these people that are buying in an ETF have no shot at that. If all of a sudden the government decided, and does it sound outlandish to you that the government would confiscate Bitcoin? They've already done it. That's how we have 325,000 Bitcoin. So this isn't even something that people should say, oh, well, the government would never do that. Well, because I don't know why anybody would trust government at this point anyway. But even with respect to the confiscation of Bitcoin, they have been doing it actively. And these ETFs would make that something that could happen in an instant. And they'd use national security or whatever. We've got to defeat China. We've got to stop money laundering. We have to stop drug dealers, or whatever it would happen to be. And with a click of a button, they could confiscate these ETFs. Another question, certainly I will pose to people. I guess I don't pose these things. I've been posing these people for a long time, but you might ask, why are libertarians begging Congress for help? If you look at what happened during the election, to me it was it was a travesty. You have the Winklevoss twins. You had these super PACs emerge. What was it called? The Fair Shake PAC or something like that. And they would invest in all these different races, and all they were looking for was somebody that was pro-Bitcoin. But what does pro-Bitcoin mean? Because if the whole point of Bitcoin was to be peer-to-peer digital cash that you don't use with banks or third parties, then why do you even need regulation to begin with? Well, it turns out that's not what it is that they're looking for. They're looking for, and they want Wall Street participation in these projects. They want the tracking. They want the flow of funds. They're perfectly happy with dumping Bitcoin onto pension funds and everything else. They're perfectly happy to have local governments start buying Bitcoin because it has nothing to do with the general idea of freedom that comes about when people have a form of money that they can use without third parties. It's about their personal economic freedom. And to the point, this Fair Shake PAC that the Winklevoss twins funded in part, the first person that they put a huge amount of money behind was Adam Schiff in California. When you actually look at the politicians that they supported, yeah, they were single issue, but I mean, they picked people that were, if you wanted to kind of rate them broadly on a liberty scale, people that you would not even put in a, you know, like they're the bottom quartile in terms of overall liberty position. So it's all become about cronyism. And by the way, when you press them on them, you know, for me being, you know, whatever, libertarian, I don't even know if I want to call it libertarian. I don't even know how to specify it because I've tried to not engage in politics, but going to these libertarian meetings or hanging out with libertarian groups, there's still this thing. They're selling the propaganda. Well, they're not selling the propaganda. They're selling the promise from 2012, even though the product that they're actually delivering looks more like the CBDC version of gold. And now they're celebrating when they get wins to get politicians to buy their cryptocurrency. That's not libertarian. It's complete cronyism. And then when you actually look at it, I mean, what even when you think about the idea now is that when you look at all of the memes and some of the stuff that they've put out there, you know, anybody that came in, and there's a dividing line. Like if you're like the class of 2017, after Epstein hijacked it, like after this whole transition, then there's like this, you know, this book, The Bitcoin Standard, comes out, which is a complete propaganda book. And then you'll see these people that are like, well, you should study Bitcoin. And it's like, they've got this stack of, they like to brag and show a picture of 10 books that they've read and the list of all of the podcasts that they've listened to on the topic. And I mean, it's really interesting to, I've actually downloaded a bunch of the transcripts and analyzed them. And now these podcasts, and I watched, because somebody sent me one, because I stopped watching them a long time ago. And I watched about a half an hour of it. And I'm like, they're sitting there talking about why they hope that Michael Saylor's company gets listed in the S&P 500, because that is going to mean, you know, blah, 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 blah. Like the early podcasts were, yeah, we're going to beat the central banks and we're going to stop funding war and tyranny. And now people are sitting around with like this circle of podcasts where everybody's referring to one another. And in the end, it's all just hype and propaganda to pump the cryptocurrency. And it's completely devoid of any element of freedom. I spoke to some people that went to the last Bitcoin conference, and they said they couldn't even believe it. They said it was unrecognizable from kind of the early days, in that there wasn't anybody talking about freedom. It's been completely compromised. But, you know, if you know some people, ask these people why they're pushing for and why they're on board with and comfortable with civil asset forfeiture and the theft of people's coins. Ask them why they're comfortable with and are excited about the idea of using taxpayer money to buy a particular asset, when I'm sure you can find examples of when these very same people talking about other politicians doing the same thing, and then labeling that as cronyism and labeling that as something that is anti-free market. Well, the other question is, why do Bitcoin maximalists block all critics? And again, I mean, I'm posing these as questions, but I guess people wouldn't even, that might not even come up, because for that to come up, you'd have to know that Bitcoin maximalists block all critics. So as I said, Saylor, all of them, Max Kaiser, most of the Bitcoin Core developers have blocked me. And, you know, I've actually found that they have there's a GitHub somewhere that actually has a list. They systematically will just keep lists of people to block, because in fact, I mean, It's effective from an algorithmic perspective based on how X works. If you have a lot of people that mute or block you, that actually affects and determines your reach. So they have been systematically doing this. They did this in a big way, as Roger discussed with the Reddit groups early on, when there was this whole block size war thing. There was a whole issue with censorship and people not being able to even openly discuss and air their position on whether or not Bitcoin should be permanently artificially capped at 1 megabyte or not. People that were very influential were actually kicked out of the discussion. And I mean, I've talked to a lot of people that this happened to, but whatever. I want to talk about a Reddit group from 10 years ago. I'm talking about what's actively going on today. They will actively block you today if you raise some of these points that were raised. In fact, that's a good test for you. You can take any of these concepts and questions that we've talked about and go to Michael Saylor's page, go to some of these other people's pages and ask them some questions and see if they don't block you. Before Roger was arrested, right after the book came out, I believe he and one other guy had offered $500,000 to add him back to debate the contents of hijacking Bitcoin. $500,000 to a charity of Adam Back's choice, and he declined. Now, what's happened is in the early days, there were a lot of debates. There were a lot of public debates. You can find them online. You can find them on YouTube. I watched a lot. I watched these as it was going on. So you'll see like Roger debating Samson Mao, and then a whole variety of other people. They're fascinating debates. But now, basically, the response that you get back is the equivalent of, well, the science is settled. It's kind of like the idea that when this just came up, the kind of the smoking gun with Epstein's involvement, and the response back was, well, this was old news. It isn't old news. I have never seen any of these people say, oh, yeah, we know that Epstein directly financially funded the Bitcoin Core developers, and that one of them actually ended up becoming a co-author of the U.S. retail CBDC pilot. I have never seen any of these people state that publicly. Never, not once. And again, 27 states and 4 countries, nobody's heard of this. So they'll try to pocket this by saying, well, yeah, we had these debates over the scaling thing, and that's old news. The big blockers, as they call it, lost, and now we've moved on. Well, in light of Epstein's involvement, and in light of this new information, and in light of the fact that 99.99% of the people on this planet have never heard of the block size wars, I think that this information needs to become more readily available, particularly now that people are being forced to have their taxpayer money go into this, or at least there are plans and proposals for this. I don't think that the majority of new people buying Bitcoin have any idea what they're buying. And I actually think the majority of people selling Bitcoin, if you're somebody at BlackRock and you're pitching the ETF, or if you're at Fidelity or whatever, I'm sure the people who are actually selling these things, they don't know anything about it either. That's how suppressed this information is. And the last thing is, if Bitcoin succeeded, why does the system love it? And I think we kind of touched on that earlier, which is that, Wall Street owns ETFs worth 214 billion. Government owns 327 coins. And the way that it's presented is, well, we won, right? So they'll play the clip of Jamie Dimon saying that, oh, this thing is going to be useless, it's fraud, it's for money laundering. And then now the narrative is, well, we won. And, see, it was game theory, and the game theory worked out. And the truth is that peer-to-peer digital cash, which was the threat to the system, was hijacked, and the Bitcoin that they're buying is not a threat to their system, which is why they're all on board. They didn't lose. You got hijacked, and then are too delusional to admit it to yourself. So that's essentially what's happened. So anyway, I know there was a lot to go through. I was not as prepared as this as I would have liked to have been because of the internet issues and so forth. But fact, I didn't have a time to send email out to my followers for this, and I haven't sent anybody any links for the Q&A, and I suspect there are probably some people that would want to jump in on this. I'm going to put the link to the StreamYard if you want to join the Q&A. I don't think I'm going to go too long tonight because I want to fix this cough and get some rest. But we'll see if there are people that actually want to engage in this. You'll note that no Bitcoin maxis will show up. Literally, they will not show up. They will not debate. There have been times on various shows. I know Shannon Joy has a show, and somebody went on and they saw me on there, and they didn't like what I had to say, and then they were offered to come on and debate, and they didn't debate. And so this is the reality of the situation. And to be honest, the debating is. So the issue that I have is it's not even about, I'm not trying to convince Bitcoin maxis. Bitcoin maxis have sold out their ideology to the point where they're kind of, in my opinion, they're in the camp of it's easier to fool someone than convince them they've been fooled. And so spending a lot of effort actually trying to convince a Bitcoin maxi at this point is a waste of time. However, the broader issue is people out there, I actually feel, I get genuinely angry about the fact that I see people being duped into buying this, that they're using 2012 talking points to sell something that is not what was in the white paper and does not match those talking points at all. It makes me very angry to see that, because there are people that are getting ripped off and they're buying that this is freedom money, and then and then they haven't thought it through. I mean, even think about the idea that we're going to buy a million Bitcoin and then hold it for 20 years and pay off the national debt. I mean, does that sound like, you're kind of at the bottom of the ninth inning and mixing metaphors, but just you're going to bet it all on the roulette wheel? I guess maybe it is actually as nonsensical of an idea that you can blend those metaphors, but it's truly absurd. So I'm sending around some chat invitations. But this is what people believe. And then they've tried to turn it into an America thing. And by the way, as I've said with AI, they're going to try to get people to ration their electricity on the basis of beating China, even though the companies that are being supported with this, like Oracle and OpenAI and SoftBank, et cetera, are globalist technocratic organizations that have contracts and work with China. This is how snowed we are. This is how the political thing completely has gone off the rails on these issues. But I do see a real similarity with digital currencies and AI. And by the way, as I say all of this, again, I'm not anti-crypto. I am for stopping basically the complete crushing of our free will through technocracy. And that cannot be done through a 7 transaction per second surveillance blockchain that the government can confiscate. I like privacy coins. I like Xano. I like Freedom Dollar. I like Monero. I like other privacy coins. I like the idea that we can go back to what people originally thought Bitcoin was and have a medium of exchange that we can use to engage in transactions with one another that can't be programmed and tracked and censored by the government. And that's actually a necessity once you understand technocracy. This is the reason why I will continue to bang on the importance of technocracy. Which is because if you don't understand technocracy, you're going to miss the point. You're going to think that, oh, well, sure, it makes sense to use technology to make things more efficient. That's different than this is a system that doesn't recognize individual rights or property rights, and where decisions are made from the top down by algorithms, scientists, and engineers. That's a completely different proposition. No libertarian should be supportive of technocracy. It is a completely anti-libertarian ideology. Yet, unsuspectingly, I suppose, there are a lot of libertarians that are cheering it on, and they probably don't know better. In the same way with AI, yeah, if you're using a big, a model from Google or Anthropic, which is tied to Microsoft or one of these other companies, they not only is it trained on woke data, but then they add on top of that another layer that censors the output. Well, that's not going to end well. I mean, this has the capacity to be significantly worse than the rate at which search engines became censored. I mean, in the early days before Google, there really wasn't censorship. You'd use something like InfoSeek or Alta Vista, and whatever the search results were, the search results that based on the text of the page. I mean, the search results might not have been great in terms of their accuracy, or it may have been very easy to manipulate if you were somebody who knew how the search engines work. But it wasn't this like blatant, hey, we're working with the CBDC and we're working with this group of people, and like we're literally not going to allow a wide swath of content to even be indexable. Well, AI is even worse than that. I mean, they can very quickly tailor the output, and they do tailor the output. This is why the work that Mike Adams is doing with BrightU.ai and the stuff that I'm building, and the reason that I do things like the Technocracy Atlas and other projects that we're launching, OSR and everything else, is if you have your own set of original source data, and then you use basically a language model and you tune a language model to access that data. So you're basically using the AI as a chat interface, but to data that you actually have in your own possession, first source data, then this is just a very effective way at getting access to information and being able to do research. I'm going to show you, probably based on how the timing works, probably not until January. I have built something that I've started to use where I took my genetic information, my actual genome, and have it on my computer. And I run it against a bunch of databases to figure out, it's not 23andMe, by the way, sanitizes the responses. So if you're using 23andMe, they will explicitly not tell you information. There was the BRCA1 and C2 gene that is potentially linked to, or is linked to, breast cancer. And for a while, they would actually tell people, hey, you have an elevated risk for this. And they ended up getting pressured to take that down because it was costing the healthcare system money, because people were going out and getting preventative mastectomies. So I'm going through there and I'm looking at this. I'm like, all right, well, now I've got my raw data. These are my genes. So I have the list of all of the genes, and now I can map those genes to various databases for actual diseases. And so now I can like use my, GPUs and everything to kind of crank through that. And when a new thing is discovered, and by the way, I don't believe that genetics is destiny. Genetics is a small part of it. There's epigenetics and everything else, but nevertheless, there are certainly some things where it's helpful to know, where if nothing else, you have a higher propensity for something. And I'm getting back information that 23andMe would not spit out. And now I can use my computer to, if a new study comes out about a particular gene and its link, I can get an automatic update, have it run it against my own genome, and then give me an alert about a risk factor that I might have. And I've developed an interface where I can speak to it. I can speak into it. And again, I don't want to make this one of these, I'm not trying to humanize it. I'm trying to make it an effective interface. But then I can take these genetic predispositions, and then I can go to Mike Adams' AI. Or what I've been doing is I've actually been creating a series of different, I take the approach of we are responsible for our own health, but why not? I can take all of the YouTube videos for, Dr. Berg or Brecka or whatever it happens to be. Whatever I have a risk factor for, then I can go research what maybe the top 2 or 3 people are after I've done the research. And then I can download all of their information and books and then interact with basically a chatbot talking to these kind of simulated versions of these doctors based on my actual genome. And then I can also chat with, I can look at homeopathy. I can look at a whole variety of different modalities for treatment. And I can do this all by interacting with it by voice or just through a kind of a chat interface. Well, I mean, you're never going to get anything like that from a doctor. A doctor won't know your genetics and is trained to only spend about 8 minutes with you and then promote whatever the pharma solutions are that their medical training and medical malpractice insurance offers. So I bring this up as a way to say, okay, well, this is a powerful way to use AI because I'm doing this in a way where I'm not sharing my data with anyone. My data remains on my computer. This isn't even a HIPAA thing. I'm completely driving my own decisions all the way across the board. And that's a powerful way to use AI. But you have to understand that the default right now is Palantir Health working with Oracle, working with the federal government, collecting data across not only healthcare information. By the way, HIPAA does not protect your health information from the people you want to have it, the people you don't want to have it the most, which is government and other insurance agencies. The government can use HIPAA because they're a covered entity and they can get your information. They can get your labs from Quest Diagnostics or from LabCorp. And they can use a whole list of, well, it's a public health emergency. It's this. They have a whole variety of things. And then you have the fact that then there's Medicare and everything else where they're directly paying for it. So the people you don't want to have access to your information have access to your information. So my view is, right, I want to have access to my information and I want to be able to make the best decisions without any involvement from the government and actually without any involvement from a doctor. I don't want to have to go through a process where they're collecting any of the information. And frankly, they don't know much about it. The ability to map your own data across, against all of these databases is certainly better than the diagnostic tools available to your doctor. In fact, the doctors are they're archaic. I mean, I haven't been to a doctor in 15 years, but but the typical process is you go in and you have to fill out the same paperwork. You go to the front desk and there's an intake form. It's like, I'm already a patient here. Why don't you have this record? And then you fill out the paperwork and then you go to a nurse and then the nurse asks you to fill out the paperwork again. And then the doctor comes in. It's like the entire process is absurd. And obviously the number of medical errors and everything else. But what I'm saying is there's a really powerful way to use AI to access kind of the world's historical knowledge about health as it pertains specifically to your genetics and your own behavior. And this can be done outside of the government and third parties knowing about it. So that's a powerful thing. So privacy coins are great. Self-custody AI solutions and other things like the kind of things that I'm trying to work on now and build and in the tools, the whole point of the Technocracy Atlas is this is going to be, it's open source, free, publicly available, and, ultimately fully censorship resistant. It's not to start because I'm trying to get it fully functional, but I mean, I'm going to use things like IPFS. And so everything's decentralized. It's just to make these tools available to empower people. This is the way that we fight back. We can't hide from AI. There are a lot of people that are doing that now and or trying to project that it's a bubble and that it's not actually going to jeopardize their job or anything like that. That's not going to end well. Hiding, nor is, kind of like hiding in the woods strategy either. Technocracy is an ideology, is a global ideology, and it is a top-down control system. So it's incompatible with other systems by its design and by their stated intent. And so this is why it's so important to understand what technocracy is so that you don't get stuck with it. You don't get trapped by it. And you realize that a lot of people don't take action because they're afraid of some bad thing that might happen in the future. So in other words, it's not illegal to use privacy coins now. It's not illegal to do any of the things that we're talking about here, but people will not try them because they think that they might become illegal. Well, I've got news for you. The default is that these things are going to become illegal, because that is what the technocratic plan is. I harp on this Maha thing so much because what's going on with wearables and AI in healthcare, United Healthcare is using AI to process claims, and they're in a lawsuit where it's alleged that they deny 90% of Medicare Advantage claims. Well, then if you actually appeal to an AI. And of course, the rejection rate is like almost 100% on the appeal process. Well, Medicare and Medicaid is going to start implementing AI next year. And again, this is Kennedy's HHS. You have to understand what he said is he wants to make America healthy again. That's not the same as medical freedom. He believes that government should play a direct role with gold standard science and everything else in making people healthy. And look, my view is this is a guy who's been kind of a screw up his entire life. He's got a chip on his shoulder and a whole issue with his family. And so now he's worried about his legacy, and he still believes in government. So his intentions may be good, but that is a recipe for complete disaster. So he may be meeting with these people. He actually thinks, so what is it? Make America biotech accelerant again. So he thinks that the same people that have been killing us and bleeding us of our financial resources for the last several decades are now all of a sudden, because he's there with his positive intent, going to use a different type of scientific approach to cure and heal everybody. That doesn't make any sense. And it certainly isn't what's being implemented. So you can watch other podcasts I've done on this. I will be talking a lot more about healthcare when we launch OSARA, but on the OSARA website itself, I'm going to provide a lot of tools that allow you to see this information directly. See things like 95% of hospitals don't publish their pricing. You can't find out how much procedures cost. And the variation can be $55 for a 10-cent aspirin in one place, $50,000 for an MRI versus $300 somewhere else, and you can't know in advance. You can't price shop. And for a while, it was illegal for hospitals to provide pricing. And then in 2021, they required that hospitals provide the pricing information, but they said, look, there's a $300 a day fee if you don't produce the pricing. And so 95% of hospitals have opted to not produce the pricing, because if you're ripping people off at that level, well, I mean, in my opinion, just putting together, which will be part of the site, a map that says, hey, is your hospital one of the ones that's not providing pricing information? And then we can do a couple of things. We can have people start submitting their bills publicly and crowdsource information to publicly show what the pricing actually is, which will horrify people. If people saw transparently what the pricing was, there would be probably a riot. People would be absolutely, because most people think, well, I got this bill, but maybe it's just me, or maybe it's a one-off situation, and not only to find out that it's actually everyone and the whole thing's a ripoff. This is why medical tourism is 80% less expensive, and that's including the travel and recovery time. And the outcomes are better. And most people that I've talked to about this, they just assume this is either for rich people, or the doctors are bad, or it's only for cosmetic procedures. And as I've discussed, it's complex heart surgeries, cancer treatment. There are many treatments that you can get outside of the United States that aren't even legal here. We are not on the cutting edge of healthcare at all, and our healthcare is a complete and total ripoff. So anyway, the more we make these tools available, the better. So I'm not anti-crypto. I'm telling you that Bitcoin was hijacked, and I'm telling you that what is going on right now is disgusting. And I'm particularly saying, since a lot of you are libertarians, that this stuff needs to be called out. And if anybody wants to challenge me on it, that's great, fine. But what I find is there's this, well, we don't want to rock the boat or whatever. Like I don't even know how we've gotten into the point where people are like, well, we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to talk about this. They're passing pro-crypto legislation. It's not pro-crypto legislation. Crypto didn't require legislation. The point of crypto was to be outside of that system. So I don't know if it's a self-esteem issue where people want to be now accepted by Larry Fink and BlackRock. They want a seat at the big table, and now they're willing to sell their entire ideology. I don't know what combination of factors has led to this, but people have abandoned freedom entirely and liberty entirely to get behind the train of pushing Bitcoin, to the point where now Bitcoin is associated with liberty and you can't speak against it. And that has to stop. So I'm going to be more vocal. Not that I have not been vocal. I certainly have been vocal, but at this point, it's so important because the basis of technocracy is control through digital money. More particularly and ironically, the whole point from the 1930s was an energy credit-based system. And now you could actually argue based on even what Musk has said. Musk has said, well, Bitcoin is backed by energy. Now people are buying this. I'm seeing people openly, libertarians openly support technocracy, not realizing that the ideology is about as anti-libertarian as you can get. Now, some of it may be out of a lack of understanding, but I've been talking about this enough, and I know there are enough people that won't even debate it or even talk about it. And they might even privately say, well, yeah, I understand that maybe this is going a little bit the wrong way, but the price keeps going up. Then they'll say, well, the market has spoken, right? Which is this weird case. The market has spoken. Okay, so we've used propaganda and censorship to suppress the alternative view. And then now we're using politicians to try to force people to buy something. And then somehow this has become the market. And if anybody should understand and be able to recognize cronyism, it should be a libertarian. And they seem to be fully embracing cronyism. So I'm going to call it out simply because we don't have a choice. If we don't start adopting first and foremost alternative currencies, we have no ability and capacity to stop technocracy. That's the heart of the control system. So we have lost so much time. We have lost since 2017, and it's demoralizing, and since I've gotten involved with Zano and I've been talking to a lot of people, a lot of the OGs that got into Bitcoin early on because they saw it as a solution to central banks, and then they saw what happened to it, and a lot of them became demoralized. They certainly didn't side with the maxi position, but there was kind of people were lost for a while because now what do we do? Because now it's become more complicated to explain. I mean, when you have to fight within libertarian circles over freedom money, what shot do you have of expanding it out to others? And so there is some rallying now around the privacy coin space. In general, you may have noticed Zano, Zcash, Monero, all of these other privacy coins have significantly outperformed Bitcoin as of late. And this is despite the fact that, in the case, I think Monero was just delisted again. Every time Monero gets delisted, the price goes up. People all over the world are starting to understand if a government is trying to ban something, then that's probably where the potential for freedom is. And I was just on a podcast and we were talking about this as well. There's this kind of, Trump presented that the war on crypto is over. The war on crypto is not over for people that are open source developers of privacy technology. People like Roman Storm and the Samurai Wallet people and other Tornado Cash developers and everything else, those people are still getting jail time. Those court cases are still going on. These are people that developed open source software that protects people's Fourth Amendment rights. And why are they still being targeted? Those are the people that the cases should have been dropped first, not Hawk Tua. Or, as much as, whatever, buyer beware. I mean, meme coins are Ponzi schemes. Whether they should be illegal or not is a separate question, but they are blatantly illegal. At least they were under the previous regime. Those people got their cases dropped. But if you were an open source developer and you actually got an opinion letter from a lawyer stating that what you were doing was legal and what you were doing was actually intended to defend people's Fourth Amendment rights, those people are still being prosecuted. Well, why is that? Well, I can tell you why that is. This is why I wrote my book and have spent as much time as I have trying to raise awareness around these political prisoners. They wanted to shut down people, not who were violating the law, but who were promoting freedom-based alternatives to what is becoming an increasingly tyrannical system. Those are the people that were targeted. Those are the people that remain targeted. Those are the people that remain suppressed. So the Bitcoin thing has been a real distraction for all of this. And I know, and again, I get angry and animated about it. I know there's some people that don't know better, but it's the people that I know better. Those are the people that I have an issue with, because they've amassed a following because the price went up. So everybody's like, oh, well, this guy seems to know what he's doing because the price went up or whatever. And so they still have a following. And so they're still reporting the same sound bites. They're still saying the same things that they were saying 10 years ago, even though the project has changed and even though they know better. And then maybe they'll try to weasel out of it. Well, I don't like the fact that it's BlackRock ETFs or anything else. I'm in this for the decentralization. So that's why we should be what decentralization? What are you talking about? What does that even mean? You're using that as a term, but what is the effectiveness? What does that mean when 60% of the hash power is controlled by 3 miners and all of the coins are tracked and can be seized by the government? What do you mean? What are you even talking about? Decentralization. And now that you can't use it as cash, now that the entire purpose of it is digital gold, then what is the the arguments don't make sense. The rhetoric doesn't make sense. And I think these people need to start coming clean. I mean, it's all right to have made a mistake. Maybe some of these people have made a mistake, but the ones that are continuing to push it and continuing to push the same narrative, those people have to be called out. And, I don't think that we can allow this pseudo polite interaction to go on anymore, because it's literally damaging to our ability to fight the threat of technocracy. So anyway, if you want to join the live chat, again, I apologize. I didn't even send out the email. There would be certainly a lot more people here. If I sent it out to the normal followers of the show, and I did get the invitations out, but I will, I'll put the StreamYard link in. If anybody has any other questions, is it too late to claim the freedom dollars that you gave away? No, it's not too late. Most of them have been claimed. I did notice that some have gone into my spam filter, which is bizarre because I had a chain of everyone. I blind carbon copied everyone, and then somehow something got into the thing. So no, you can still claim that. If you wouldn't mind, DM me on X at Aaron R. Day. That way, in case there's any spam issue, and I certainly will send those out ASAP. Let's see. Yes, much of the crypto and Bitcoin space talks doesn't make sense unless it's exactly what it was meant to be or hijacked to be. Yeah, it is. I don't know. I mean, at this point, how do you look at that Epstein email and then still try to rationalize that? Directly funding those devs, and then knowing that they also directly funded the CBDC pilots. Like, how can you look at that and say, oh, okay, these people really believed in Lightning and really believed in the second layer solution. They weren't trying to sabotage it to pave the way for CBDCs. It's very clear what happened now, and it's direct at what happened. I literally know nothing about any of this stuff. Been trying to learn. I hear all the Bitcoin maxis talk bad about Roger Ver and how the big block thing would have co-opted Bitcoin. I mean, again, I've done multiple podcasts on this, including had Roger on before everything happened, and you can read his book. But yeah, they do talk. They do talk badly about him, and Roger was undecided. There's a myth that Roger started Bitcoin Cash, or that he in any way started the block size wars. He did not. He was not the dev behind it at all. He was originally undecided. What tipped him into the other camp was that he saw censorship and propaganda going on, and Roger knows enough about history to know that the people that are being censored and the people that are being propagandized against are usually the people that are telling the truth. And so that's what even caused him to consider and spend more time reflecting on the alternative position. But I will tell you, the funny thing is, go to Adam Back and Michael Saylor and Max Kaiser, go to their feeds and raise some of these questions that I talked about here tonight about block size war, about all of these various things, and watch, they'll block you. So there are people that say, well, Roger was making up that there was censorship and propaganda. I'll show you all of the people that have blocked me. In fact, it's on my X feed. You can see when they blocked me. A lot of them blocked me simply for writing wasn't even a long review. It was like, oh, I just read Hijacking Bitcoin. I recommended it. And then Roger retweeted it. And then a bunch of people just instantly blocked me. I had no interaction with them. So that is a fact, and it will happen to you too. And it is also a fact that there are GitHubs and lists of people that are that amongst the Bitcoin community are automatically blocked systematically as a way to suppress the algorithms from reach for those people. And that has had a negative impact on me. I heard about his book. Would you say it's a bad idea to still acquire Bitcoin? I won't buy Bitcoin or hold it because it's not about the price. We need to have an alternative to technocracy. We need to have an alternative to centralized digital money that can be controlled by the state. And Bitcoin is the opposite of that. So I don't care if it goes to $10 million a coin. It will not help us stop technocracy. And if we don't stop technocracy, we will literally lose free will, because we will be completely governed by a social credit system that's determined from the top down by AI. Feeding Bitcoin feeds that system. So I'm not going to and so let's talk about, well, why would it go up in price? The fact that it's gone down in price at this point, to me, when you have governments talking about buying it, who's buying it? Like, they're out of propaganda. And at this point, if you're $1.7 trillion, when you're a smaller market cap project, and a lot of it's tightly held, or a lot of it's been lost, a lot of the coins have been lost, and there's not a lot of volume moving, you can move the price. But at this point, when the information is out about it, how are you going to move the price at this point? So I guess it's at 80. I'm just looking at my thing now. It's at $87,400 or whatever. I mean, what would possibly cause it to go up? Who would buy it at these prices? And if you're now down to governments buying it and confiscating it, then do you want to be putting your energy towards that? I don't want any of my energy going towards that. Now, with that said, if you do have it, use something like confidential layer to make it private when you're spending it. I think that's a very good solution that has emerged, built on the Zeno blockchain. By being able to tokenize your Bitcoin and your Ethereum, you can now spend these in a way that's private. So at least that can help somewhat. But again, I'm not giving it investment advice. My entire life philosophy at this point, and 100% of what I spend my time doing, is trying to educate people about technocracy, but then it's building the parallel solutions. I truly believe what people should invest in right now is themselves. AI is going to completely transform the labor market, and a lot of people are going to lose jobs. That is a fact of, I use this stuff all of the time, like in a pretty serious way at this point. And I've been involved with technology. I mean, I started using computers when I was 5. I started my first tech company when I was 19. I've never seen a technology develop this quickly. In the last 90 days have been mind-boggling. Even the last month. I mean, I'll talk back and forth with Mike Adams, and it's like, oh my God, stuff that we were doing last week has been, superseded by something that allows us to do the same thing in like 5 minutes that would have taken a year ago. Like it is literally that fast. And when I'm saying AI, I'm saying, using AI for coding, using AI for processing information, not the way people use Chat GPT or these other things. That's kind of a, censorship and curated information by woke people. But if you actually use the underlying language models to do things like coding and data analysis, it's incredibly powerful. But it will displace a lot of the job market. But a lot of people don't like their jobs. Most people don't like their jobs. And they have their job. A lot of people have their jobs so they can have health insurance. Health insurance that doesn't even improve their health. We have one medical bankruptcy every minute in this country. So you have people working jobs they don't want for health insurance that doesn't keep them healthy, so that after a life of quiet desperation working in this job, they can accumulate a retirement portfolio, which is comprised of mainly big tech companies and big pharma companies that are building their digital prison and wiping out their health and extracting all of their savings. So the situation is not all that great. So a lot of people fear if there's a fear of loss, but they haven't really reflected on if what they're doing right now is really aligned with their own purpose anyway. So I think this is a good time for people to reflect on, what do you actually want to do, and take some of your money and investing in those skills and in learning about those things. And then learning about how to use tools to empower yourself and to get out of these systems where you're controlled by third parties. That is the single best investment I think that people should make, because I don't think that there's a strategy here of knowing that every asset is a bubble, knowing that there's a technocratic agenda behind it all, and that these AI surveillance systems are being rolled out, digital IDs, CBDCs, and so forth globally, which I demonstrated with the Technocracy Atlas. That's the base case scenario. Things are not going back to the way they were, nor are they staying constant. They're moving in a very specific direction. So rather than do things out of fear or make investments based on what you think other people might do wrong, invest in yourself and invest in figuring out how to take back control of your own thoughts, actions, and emotions. To me, that's very simple. And that's going to be a different answer as to what that is for everyone. Although next year, some of the tools I'm going to roll out will help people to understand that. I'm working on something now. I don't know how or even when that's going to fit into this, but to try to show people one of the most valuable thing we actually have is time, our time and attention. And if you were to actually record how your attention is being diverted and how your time is spent on a day-to-day basis, and then you could see visually, oh, wow, I'm giving up this much of my time and attention to these influencers or this big tech company or entertainment or whatever it happens to be. If you diagram that and you realize, hey, if I reclaim that time, what could I do with my life? And how could I direct my action? So to me, this is why I always say this is not a voting your way out situation, or even passively watching influencers debate on a point will fix nothing. But we can individually decide how we want to redirect our attention and our efforts. And we all have the ability to do that, despite the fact that institutions will try to convince us that we're stupid and that we're not capable of making our own decisions. That is blatantly false. Let me see here. I have some other comments here. Majority never read the white paper. That's true. Hospital is a dangerous place for a sick person to be. That's literally and objectively true. Based on the number of people that die from medical treatment itself. But the more you dig into it, and this will be part of the various aspects of these sites that we're putting together, but I went through some interesting exercises. If 50% of the people in the United States who have type 2 diabetes instantly cured themselves or cured themselves within 30 days, our hospital systems would be bankrupt. And I say that to say that there's literally an incentive against curing people. When you start to diagram how all of the money flows, there really is not a vested interest. You have people that they truly don't want some of these solutions to come out, or for people to start taking control of their health, because they view it as, well, we're going to lose jobs. And I'll start to share some of, I'm trying to figure out how to even present some of this information, but it's really, I had a healthcare company, and I spent some time figuring out how the money flows work. I like to reverse engineer things and understand incentive systems and business models. And healthcare is one of those things where once you understand how it works, you understand that no one truly benefits from making people healthier. And actually, but to the point where they will actively resist it, because there are trade associations that will go out of their way, and from their own perspective, doing it as we have to protect the livelihoods of these people, will go out of their way to make sure that things that could improve people's health are not either brought to market or even made publicly available as from a knowledge perspective, and actively suppressed using propaganda and censorship, kind of like what I'm saying has been going on with Bitcoin for quite some time. Sylvia says, Catherine also says cryptocurrencies were pump and dump scams. Well, okay, so there's yes and no. So I mean, the problem is, then I talk about this a lot, all fiat currency and all debt-based currencies fail. The average fails within 27 years. And even global reserve currencies fail. Usually, I think the last 5 after like 82 years or something. So most cryptocurrencies are pump and dump scams. A lot of these are blatantly meme coins. A lot of these things have no intended use case. They're actually Ponzi schemes. I mean, like a meme coin doesn't do anything. The only way it goes up in price is if other people buy it. But there are some cryptocurrencies that have some value, or there's some ways of using certain blockchain technology that is a dramatic improvement over all global fiat systems. And so it's not clear to me that state-issued money is a particularly compelling idea, given that it's never worked. So I've talked to Catherine about this, and I agree with her on Bitcoin on certain aspects of it, but I don't agree that fiat currency is the answer either. And so I think we need to look for you. So you have to do your homework. So I always say it's the 99% of crypto projects that give the other 1% a bad name. It is largely bad, and then the ones that are good get targeted by the government because people don't want to give up control over fiat money, which is a scam. Aaron, the government has stolen the Bitcoin. It's not owned by we the people, because I'm never going to see that Bitcoin nor the gold in Knoxville. True. I mean, that's absolutely true. Again, I don't know why people aren't more skeptical about this idea that this senator from Wyoming, Cynthia Loomis, who owns $500,000 worth of Bitcoin, unironically, not as a joke, wrote a bill and went on a stage in front of a bunch of people and said, I'm proposing that the government buys $1 trillion of this thing that I own and holds on to it for 20 years. And if they do that, we'll pay off the debt. That's absurd. That is a completely idiotic idea. And the fact that people cheer it to this day, and a lot of those people call themselves libertarians, is something that I have a hard time reconciling. It doesn't like pass a basic 101 libertarian test. So, but the funny thing was so Loomis at one point, and I think the answer to this, so as I've said, Bitcoin can be tracked. It's on a public ledger. Certainly the government has done a great job of tracking down a lot of, any of our personal Bitcoin. They'll do a great job of tracking. And now Trump wants to do this internationally. But before this latest thing where we confiscated another 130,000 Bitcoin, Loomis had actually put something out saying, well, I was just alerted to the fact that, the United States government doesn't know how many Bitcoin it actually has and may have sold some of its Bitcoin. So now it turns out, I believe that what happened was we have different federal departments that were involved in confiscating the Bitcoin. So FBI was involved in some aspects of it. Treasury was involved in some others. And so you basically had different federal departments having custody of different stolen Bitcoin. And there wasn't any kind of like clear mechanism for reporting on it. So I believe that it turns out that we do have the Bitcoin. How it's being administered right now, I'm not entirely sure. But the fact that the very woman that was proposing that the government should buy $1 trillion of it and hold it was writing a tweet saying that we can't find the Bitcoin that we think we have. Like, how is that not a parody? That is like a comedy act in and of itself. And yet these people still support this woman. There are people that like try to present and pretend that she's a libertarian. And this still goes on today. Again, Warren Davidson today, he's out, yesterday. I mean, my X feed is filled with this. And by the way, it's filled with so many lies. A lot of the stuff is blatant lies. Like they'll claim, this rapper, Drake or something is buying $1 billion worth of Bitcoin, or this country's buying. And a lot of times it's completely made up. There's actually no substance to it at all. We've gotten to a point where there are people that are holding on to this and they know that at this point it is a Ponzi. The only way that this goes up is if more people buy. Well, who's going to buy when it's $1.7 trillion? There aren't many people with deep pockets. So BlackRock was a great opportunity to go to unsophisticated investors. See, the way that the scam works is you have the SEC, which sets up these rules so that only rich people can invest in startups. And what they do is they say, well, these things are really high risk, so you have to be wealthy or sophisticated to be able to invest in them. So we don't want these widows and orphans to get ripped off. So we don't want you to be able to invest in Amazon when it's 10 cents a share and when it's a small company with 50 people. We don't want to burden you with that risk. So we're going to set up these rules so that only these venture capitalists, hedge funds, and big people, larger players can invest when the price is cheap. And then by the time it becomes an offering that BlackRock is selling, well, the thing's already worth $1 trillion. So those people that are in early, they're cashing out. So the misconception here is that it's BlackRock buying Bitcoin. It's not BlackRock buying Bitcoin. It's BlackRock setting up a vehicle and collecting fees, selling Bitcoin to people after all of these other rich people got in first. This is how all of these financial services products work. And then they've got a whole regulatory thing with only financial advisors can advise you, and they have to go through their propagandized training through an organization called FINRA, which, while it's a trade association, it actually has legal authority backed up by the SEC. It's a scam. The financial services market is a scam. But no, we're not going to see the Bitcoin. And by the way, even if they had it, they'd end up borrowing against it. They'd come up with some scam where it's like, okay, well, yeah, we held the Bitcoin, but then we took out, $200 billion worth of loans against it. And then the price dropped and, whatever. They would find a way to squander it. But the idea that somehow that they're going to buy this asset and it's going to go up and we're going to wipe out our debt, it just doesn't make sense. I've put together memes like this. Cynthia Lummis might as well take $1 trillion worth of taxpayer money and go to the roulette wheel. It's effectively the same concept. And so it's disgusting that libertarians support this. I'm part of my frustration with this is that I'm trying to warn people about the larger technocracy thing. And I know a lot of people don't know about it, and they should, which is why I'm going to continue to recommend Patrick Wood and Courtney Turner's new book and The Great Betrayal, but all of Patrick Wood's information and Courtney's information on technocracy, because it really spells out what's going on. And I think a lot of these libertarians just don't know, because the information, it took me a long time to find Patrick Wood's information, but once you do understand it, it's really hard to look away. FinCEN is involved. FinCEN stole my cryptocurrency in the 90s. You had cryptocurrency in the 90s? What cryptocurrency did you have in the 90s? Bitcoin is digital assets where you can transfer country to country in a few seconds. You can transfer it country to country in a few seconds. That's true. The funny thing is the people that are propping this up, people say, well, how else are you going to move, $100 million across the globe? And it's like, okay, is that your use case? Right. A lot of the people that are talking about, I'm running a node on my, $50 Raspberry Pi. Yeah. You're sitting there watching central banks move value back and forth. That's not freedom money. That doesn't actually benefit the people. But beyond that, it's also trackable money, right? So it does have the benefit of being fast and something you can do cross-border. The banking situation that we have is once you dig into understanding how banks actually work technically, it's amazing any of this stuff works. And banks interacting with one another across borders is a complete nightmare. It's very expensive. It's very time consuming. There's a lot of risk involved. There's a lot of legal liability involved. This is why cryptocurrency, again, the original idea of peer-to-peer cash is something that you could use anywhere in the world. And it's not just, it liberates people. I think that it's 71% of people on the planet make less than $10 a day. And so the ability to be able to do transactions globally, this is something that has a major impact for people everywhere. That was one of the key features of Bitcoin early on. If you were in the global South, if you were in Africa, if you were in Southern America, et cetera, or you have a lot of people that were sending money back home, that work in the United States and send money back home, and Western Union fees and everything else would eat a significant percentage of their income. So that was great, but that was destroyed when the artificial caps were put in place. And so now, I don't remember, Roger was doing a debate and people made fun of him about it. He was debating Samson Mao, but he was actually saying that people were literally dying because of the increased fees due to the artificial block size. And this whole thing became, Samson Mao would say, well, Bitcoin isn't for people who make, less than $10 a day. And then that thing number kept on coming up, and it's not for buying coffee and everything else. That wasn't the original vision. We need peer-to-peer digital cash for the world. People globally need the ability to engage involuntary commerce. And now people mock people who promote technology that can liberate and provide economic freedom around the world. And it is a life and death matter for people. Talk about BSV. I think China is behind it all. BSV is a whole other rabbit hole. I don't even know where my first and second episodes were about BSV. I spent a lot of time on that, and that's a whole rat's nest as well. The conclusion that I came to is that this is where I'm kind of like, I don't know, Craig Wright claims to be Satoshi. I absolutely do not believe that that's the case. And I tracked a lot of his legal documents from court case to court case. And this is not, it doesn't stand up. I mean, it's a pretty sophisticated situation with some bad news behind it. So this guy claimed to be Satoshi, but then created a version of it that kind of restored Bitcoin to what the original white paper was supposed to be. But then when you look at it, it's kind of like, all right, well, this is kind of a surveillance ledger, and where you can track everything. So the transparent aspect of it. So then part of the idea was people started to sell themselves with BSV with, well, if you could really do a million transactions per second, then everybody will have to use it because it's more efficient. And it's such a naive understanding of thinking that central banks and others are going to pick technology because it's the most efficient. Our financial systems and even our capital markets don't work based on using the best technology. I mean, it takes like 3 days to settle a stock certificate. There's one company in the middle that like houses all of the physical stock certificates for publicly traded companies. A lot of the incumbent players, it's about maintaining control. It's not about efficiency. So somebody that comes up with something that says, well, hey, everybody has to use my system now because it's more efficient. And now all of a sudden governments and central banks are going to have to use my technology. And that means that now everyone is going to be transparent and everyone's going to be honest. That is like probably the lowest IQ take I've ever heard about how reality works. So that I think became an issue for me with BSV, but even the whole concept. And look, I've talked about other aspects of scams related to this. I did a whole episode on Jassara, and the debt jubilee. There's a scam that is ongoing that's been going on since before 9/11. And in fact, there were some people that came up with this theory that there was this guy that floated this plan that I guess he sent to Congress that nobody did anything about. He's just like any of a number of people that have come up with plans that said, hey, we need to eliminate all of the debt, and we need to kind of restructure the entire financial system. And obviously no one in Congress took him seriously, but somebody picked up on the idea after 9/11 and started the conspiracy theory that 9/11 happened because Congress was about to pass this debt jubilee. And so 9/11 was staged to stop this process of eliminating everyone's debt. So there's a national version of this. There's a global version of this. And I actually think there may even be like a continuation between this story and QAnon. So needless to say, the debt jubilee never happened, but the story has morphed. So this is one of those examples of a story people don't want to admit the truth, and then it keeps on building and building. So rather than realize, hey, that was pretty stupid that I believed that this was actually going to happen. So rather than believe, that I fooled me once, instead it then morphed to now XRP and this cryptocurrency called Stellar Lumens is going to be used. There's going to be a debt jubilee again. And now the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank to the central banks, is going to be involved. And everyone's debt is going to be wiped out. And you're going to receive these tokens, these Ripple and Stellar Lumens tokens that are going to be backed by gold issued through the Bank of International Settlements. So people have been pushing this as a way to get people to buy XRP and XLM. Several things happened as a result of this. And I went online and I've watched a whole bunch of videos, and there are people that still push this. They have 50, 100,000 followers. Some of these people sell subscriptions to newsletters. And there are people, and a lot of these were like elderly women or whatever, that stopped paying their mortgage because they kept on believing that these influencers were coming out and saying there's a debt jubilee. You're not going to have to pay your car payment. You're not going to have to pay for your mortgage. All of it's going to go away. So these stories of people getting evicted from their house, having to file for bankruptcy, all because of this Nassara thing. Well, then now it's escalated to, well, XRP and XLM. And I know some people that are, I don't know, perhaps like even the Michael Flynn team thing might be involved in this. I've talked to some people that I'm like, well, you really should not, you should know better than this. Like, I can't believe you're actually telling me this. Cause I mean, I've told him about CBDCs and, anti-crypto stance. This one particular guy, and he's like, oh, so are you in XRP and XLM? I'm like, are you kidding me? And he wasn't kidding. And this is a famous guy that people actually know. And I'm kind of like, wow, if this guy thinks this, how far does this go? So then you go online and there are people that still think that. Well, the entire banking system is going to run on XRP and XLM. And it's going to be tied to this is what the Great Reset is. It's kind of like with the Q thing during Trump's first administration, where they got people to celebrate and cheer on the idea that there was going to be 10 days of darkness and we were going to have martial law, and the military was going to come in and round up all of the pedophiles and have military tribunals and then execute the pedophiles on closed caption TV. They had people believing this. And what's bad about it isn't that people believed it. It's that they cheered it on. They actually were able to run a psyop where they convinced people that suspending the law and having martial law was a good idea and a white hat concept that people should get behind. And so I think there's a dovetail with anyway, this whole crypto thing with this XRP, XLM. So they've gotten people to the point where people are buying and investing into these cryptocurrencies, expecting that every day, any day now, the Bank of International Settlements, and that now there's a new ISO standard and the whole new system is going to run on this. And the thing that it's not going to happen, it's not being planned. It's a complete psyop. But what's worse is that people want it to happen and think it's a good idea. I've watched, and there's a religious guy that it promotes these ideas. I've watched multiple videos where they're on there saying, well, yeah, these are transparent blockchains, but one of the reasons that they're doing this is that, by wiping out the debt and having this new gold-based token on this cryptocurrency, we're going to be able to stop all of the drug trafficking and stop the mafia. And basically saying, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. So I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, okay, this can't be real, right? And then I'm looking at the comments, and there's hundreds of comments, thousands of comments, and a bunch of people in there putting prayers in there. And I can't wait until, this happens, and, God bless you for this, and so on and so forth. And so now people are some of the same people that, well, probably not the exact same people, same kind of people that got evicted from their homes because they stopped paying their mortgage thinking there was a debt jubilee, have now invested in cryptocurrencies thinking that the Bank of International Settlements is going to wipe out their debt and give them a transparent token that can be tracked that's backed by gold. But then it gets worse. Then they pitch to the same group of people the idea that med beds are coming and that there are these beds that you're going to be able to just sit into or lay down into, and it'll be able to cure all of your diseases, cancer and everything else. And it's this technology that they've been withholding, but any day now that's coming. So now similar thing, you have these people that are, people that are not getting medical treatment because they think that this med bed technology is happening. And so I did a podcast on that. And the funny thing is it's really popular on Rumble. Excuse me, this whole concept of Nassara Jassara, there are more videos there than even on YouTube. So I post this whole thing that's a whole takedown of this idea, and I get people in the comments saying, oh yeah, no, this is still coming. And they obviously didn't watch my video. They were like promoting it. They're bots in the comments promoting people to buy XRP and XLM based on this. And so I don't know what to tell. After you see that, and then you see the hijacking of Bitcoin, it becomes, I understand why it's difficult. This is a challenging situation, right? Our current situation is surveilled and our currency's wrecked. Then we're moving into these other digital currencies that are surveillable, but then all of these politicians own them, and they're confusing and complicated to talk about. And then a whole bunch of other people that should have known better, that were libertarians, are continuing to push a myth about Bitcoin being an alternative. In the meanwhile, we do have this big centralized push towards technocracy, and everybody's fractured and then and many people off on these just harebrained, false, made up scams. So it is kind of hard to break through all of it. But let's see, law and lawful decisions and court procedures. Interpol was supposed to be the good guys. Yeah. I mean, how's that working out? I don't know. It's a challenge. It is a big challenge. I hope, I think the fact that I didn't get the emails out, and I know there are a lot of people that normally join probably don't even know that this podcast happened, but you'll find no Bitcoin maxis will join. I do have some interviews coming up, with some people that are more pro Bitcoin, certainly than I am. Although there are some people that are open to changing their mind, or at least talking about it. There's some people starting to question it. But I hope this was helpful, and I hope some of you do take some of these questions that I posed. And if it comes up, I think it'll come up over Thanksgiving, and I think it'll come up over Christmas. If nothing else, it is a national news story. The fact that Bitcoin, at least at this point, has crashed is coming up. I think that the Epstein stuff isn't going to go away. I'm wondering what distraction we're going to get from it, because it's going to be really embarrassing, and I'm sure they're going to redact a lot of it. But what has already come out with respect to Bitcoin is incredibly damning. I suspect there's a lot more. There are other things that's why I put together the Atlas and the graph thing and everything else, which I'm going to continue to expand, refine, make better, and make it easier for other people to contribute so that we can track this down. There are a lot of theories that are not, one theory is that Ghislaine Maxwell was heavily involved, and there's $1 billion early on Bitcoin transaction. There's a whole bunch of unsubstantiated information that may very well be true. I mean, I think it is true that she's one of the most prolific people on Reddit. There's a whole, but we really don't know the truth about the origins of Bitcoin. Dr. Jack Cruz is an interesting guy. He's a Bitcoin maxi. I don't agree with him on Bitcoin on that, but I'm wearing these red glasses because a lot of his stuff. But the premise here is flawed. Yeah, this is the whole miners control the protocol, node runners do. I mean, again, none of this changes the fact that it's completely trackable, completely surveillable. It does 7 transactions per second. The node runners are kind of irrelevant. I mean, they're basically sitting there observing other people do transactions. I'm not going to go into all the details. I've done other podcasts about this. So you can search them at theaarondayshow.com because all of the transcripts are searchable, but go through all of the arguments here about, again, the concept of Bitcoin being freedom money and how it's being portrayed is nonsense at this point. Hopping Reaper says, what's happening behind the scene right now? Well, I don't know which scene. Yeah, I mean, Brian, I see you're there. Go back and watch the rest of the podcast and go back and watch several of the other podcasts. We've talked about Lightning and all of the rest of this. So we've already gone through that. What's happening behind the scene right now? with Epstein and Bitcoin. Well, I mean, what's going on right now is it was speculated that Epstein's funding of MIT was related to Bitcoin core developers during the transition from Bitcoin Cash to Bitcoin, this digital gold narrative. And now it's proven that he directly funded it, which is pretty significant. How do I feel about Andreas Antonopoulos? I don't know. I mean, he blocked me also. And I don't even know why. I guess he actually just blocks people in general. I know he moved away from a maximalist position, but I haven't, frankly, followed him or seen much of his stuff lately. I mean, I know he was certainly an influential early proponent of Bitcoin when Bitcoin was still, was still digital cash. So I know he was helpful for early evangelism, but I don't even know what he's up to now. I still believe it's China with BSV. America will no longer be a global superpower. That will go to China. I mean, again, I don't think there's US or China. This is a global technocracy. I think the whole US versus China thing is a fabrication that the technocrats push to get governments to fund their technocratic enterprises. So it's kind of like this whole idea that we have Operation Stargate, which is supposed to be an American national security thing, even though Oracle and OpenAI are global corporations. Palantir is a global corporation. You're saying that all Bitcoin transactions are traceable or easy ways to obfuscate identity. Watch the rest of the fucking podcast. I'm not going to go over all of this yet again. This is going to be if you don't know how to do this or know how to do this, for 99.9% of people, Bitcoin is highly traceable. And if you look at what the work is that Chainalysis has done, if you look at the fact that because you have to use liquidity pools to be able to use Lightning Network effectively, and those are all KYC, including Strike, including Cash App. I mean, so yes, so you and 50 of your friends can do Lightning transactions. That who gives a shit? It's earlier in this podcast. Go to the AaronDayShow.com. I've probably done 10 podcasts on this, including the first podcast that I did, season 1, episode 1, but there's a whole bunch of them in there, including also I had Roger Ver on season 1, episode 3 to talk about hijacking Bitcoin. So it was earlier in this one. I touched on some of the Lightning stuff, and it's been in several of them. So just you can search. Well, actually, the whole thing is searchable, so you should be able to search the transcripts as well. I'll put an AI chatbot on there at some point, but right now it's at least searchable by transcript. But the BSV thing and China, I mean, again, you have Oracle works with China, OpenAI works with China. You have SoftBank as an investor. The idea that it's this America self-security and defense thing is bizarre, but people buy into it. I mean, Trump's done a good job of hyping up the China thing. But, look at all of the business relationships. Musk has business relationships. Peter Thiel has business relationships with China. It's not China versus the U.S. It's technocratic firms based in the U.S. and technocratic organizations in China that are vying for control of a global technocracy. Well, I understand how big that Bitcoin. Look, I've been a big proponent of confidential layer and using Zano to basically privately tokenize your Bitcoin and Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies and make it private and spendable. So I'm encouraging people to, if you are going to use BTC, which I don't like on moral grounds, but if you are going to use it, at least try to make it private. So I encourage people to look out for these things, but But broadly speaking, and I've actually also explained in many of the podcasts, I know a lot of people that have personally come to me that have been in either business dispute situations or divorce situations, and what's going on now with Chainalysis and the level to which Chainalysis has been able to aggregate information. In many ways, Bitcoin has become worse than using a bank account in terms of the ability for people to gain historical action or historical information about transactions. And so, again, I hope people use, I hope, the funny thing is, even though there are now some emerging privacy solutions, a lot of people, since they're, buying these things through ETFs and everything else, they're not even looking at it as something that they're trying to spend, because the narrative has been predominantly hijacked into this digital gold narrative that you hold through third parties. So it's which is frustrating. Like, again, it frustrates me because we've lost a lot of time and we're losing a lot of time. And if we don't have private solutions, there's a way to make Bitcoin private and get people to start using it, then, great. But man, we don't have a lot of time at all, which is something I've been trying to communicate for a while, and will continue to do so. So, all right. Well, I'm probably my voice is starting to go on me here. So I'm probably gonna end this. I guess it's not that early. I've just been going for 3.5 hours, but I appreciate everyone for joining. Usually I do these on Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 o'clock Eastern time. And we'll be skipping next week so that I can enhance the development of some of these sites. But the following week will be a great week. I'll have 2 new initiatives that we're going to launch. And then, we'll be well prepped for 2026, where hopefully we can start taking action and get people to stop believing in these, politicians and white knight saviors, because no one's going to save us. We've got to save ourselves. So with that said, have a great Thanksgiving, and thank you for joining. Have a good night.
Who's holding the mic on me? They call it free, but honey, that fee ain't free. 3 suits in a smoky room, writing what's real on cue. Crying kite moon, they sold the noon, said that's the truth to you. Mockingbirds and satin ties, singing what power buys. Change the pace, same stage, and the chorus never dies. Turn down the glow, I feel the pull. If they own the show, who owns your soul? It's programming, sweet as a lullaby. Cold cream lies in a sugar sky. If truth don't trend, it never gets told. Speak all you want, if the reach is sold, not free to me. Red room, blue room, tailored rage on tap. 24 hours of thunder in your lap. Breaking every minute till your nerves run thin. Baby, if it bleeds, the ads cash in. Scroll that line. the bebop danger to our democracy. See.